Okay, Mr. Chair, we are live.
Thank you, Julian. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. I want to call this meeting to order. Today's our February 14th Valentine's Day edition of our FGO Finance and Government Operations Committee of the City Council. All the committee members, do I see Councilor Pena? I believe I do, sorry. All of our members are present via Zoom today. This is still a remote or online meeting where all of our participants will be on video or audio conference, including members of the public who participate with us today. We appreciate your patience, including for those of you waiting on us downtown to figure out how to get back on the internet one meeting at a time. For members of the public, city staff, and media, you'll all have the ability to view this meeting live through YouTube and our Zoom webinar. The live stream can be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, or computers. And for those of you watching on the live stream, we welcome you. There's about 50 of you or so today, and we appreciate it. Written comments were received and distributed to councilors ahead of today's meeting, and members can refer to those throughout our comments and deliberations today. Members of the public have the opportunity to address the committee if they signed up for public comment for the rules published on our agenda. If you're watching on YouTube or our live feed for this meeting, we'll ask that you please turn it off or mute it when you are called upon to speak today. We'll call for the speakers when we get to the individual item you signed up for. There are some ground rules for public comment. They mirror our new city council rules for public comment, meaning that our comments have to be addressed to committee members only. They're not allowed to be addressed to other members of the public or for a Q&A. Each participant has up to 2 minutes to present, but you get a gold star if you don't use all of your time, and you can't take someone else's leftover time. And any disruptive comment will result in a removal from the Zoom meeting room. If someone's mentioned already said what you wanted to say, is perfectly okay for you to say, I agree with that person and I just want my voice to be heard. There will be a 2-minute time limit when you're called upon to speak, and Mr. Moya, our moderator, will take us through that when we get there. Councilors, to get us started today, we're going to start with EC 484. It's approval of a first supplemental agreement to add funds to outside legal services between the city and Robles, Real, and Anaya, and I move approval. Do we have a second? Thank you, Councilor. I see Councilor Bassan first. Councilors, are there any questions for the staff or the administration about this matter? Going once, going twice, seeing none, I will move for a vote. Mandy, are you our clerk of the day? Missy Nelson?
Yes, I am. I'm here, Councilor. Thank you. Okay, Councilor Bassan.
Yes.
Councilor Benton.
Yes.
Councilor Lewis.
Yes.
Councilor Pena.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
It passes unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, next up on our agenda, EC 485, the FY21 budget objective number 14 regarding Parks and Recreation Department's golf course study. I'll move a receipt be noted, and I note that the director, Mr. Simon, is here to answer any questions. Do I have a second from a member of the committee? Thank you, Councilor Bassan. I appreciate it. Councilors, any questions or comments regarding this EC on budget objective 14? Councilor Bassan, is that you for a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple questions on this, even though it's a receipt be noted. I think that it's worth asking. Do we have an update on the status of the integrated POS system at the various golf courses?
Director?
Good afternoon, committee chair and Councilor Bassan. We have yet to totally activate the POS system. We are very close to it, though. We're working out some kinks in the reports, the automatic reports that system will produce for us. And the minute we get the right reports, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have another question as well.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear that, because I think any integration of data technology is going to be beneficial for the city in particular, but also for golf courses. I guess two more. Is this so the study that was done in 2017, this is not the first time we're reviewing it. It's that we've reviewed it and then now you all have implemented some of it. Am I correct with that? Or is this the first time we've reviewed it?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Bassan, I believe that the report was reviewed back when it was originally submitted. And it's frankly, it's sort of in a formal way. And frankly, the report's been almost sort of under continual review as we've used it since I joined the city. We've used that as kind of a guidepost to reference some of our decisions and objectives against some aspects of the report as well. And then this recent review was just the result of the council's request to us in the budget to go back and look again, in addition to answer some specific questions the council had.
Okay. And then my last question is, I know that we had, there in this report, there's several different options for ways to multi-purpose different golf courses and whatnot. And I know that I have constituents that regularly reach out asking for disc golf updates. And I know I've worked with you, Director, a little bit on that regarding some of the locations, but have we improved access to that or not really? Or is it about the same? Do you have any new update for disc golf?
Committee Chair Davis and Councilor Bassan, yes, very excited about some of the progress we have made on disc golf. I'm not sure exactly where I should start in your personal knowledge or the members of the committee, but we have implemented for the very first time a full-time publicly accessible disc golf course embedded within the ball golf course at Ladera Golf Course, the public course on the west side. And that has proven to be very, very successful and popular with our disc golfers. And we're sort of integrating and have shown how those two sports can coexist at Ladera in a good way. In the meantime, we've also made over this fiscal year, we've made some improvements to the Roosevelt Park disc golf course, renovated signs there. And we have some plans that we proposed for funding to the state legislature to make some nice improvements at two of the other city disc golf courses. One is out by the Ladera Golf Course. It's known as sort of the U-Ray disc golf course. The other is the Baca disc golf course in Montesa Park. We have prepared plans for full-scale renovations of those disc golf courses. So very excited if we can get the resources together to do both of those projects. And then last but not least, we purchased in 2020, we purchased equipment that allowed us to do what I'll call pop-up disc golf to introduce more Burquiños to the sport and do it sort of in a small way in some other green spaces around the city. Obviously, COVID, for obvious reasons, closed down a lot of options to do events in the parks. But as we're reopening, we're very excited to bring disc golf in this fashion to more neighborhoods in the city.
Thank you so much, Director. That's really exciting to me. Not that I've ever played disc golf, but it looks cool. And I know that there's a lot of people that really like it. So I'm happy to hear that we're trying to make it a little bit more accessible to everyone. Mr. President, that is all for my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, any other questions for the director on the EC 485? Seeing none, we'll close those comments and ask Ms. Hinojos if she would call the roll.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, councilors, and thank you, ma'am. Next up, EC 486. This is our FY 21 and 22 state certification of the budget. It's a routine matter that we normally have gone through, and I'll move over seat be noted. Do I have a second? I see Councilor Pena raised her hand. Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, any questions for the administration or staff on this matter? Seeing none, the motion is receipt be noted. Ms. Hinojos.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you. Next up, item EC 487. This is belly freight building lease and agreement between the city of Albuquerque and Southwest Airlines. I'll move an approval. Do I have a second? Thank you again. I'll take Councilor Benton on that one. Saw who I saw first. Councilors, any questions for aviation or the administration on this matter? Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Ms. Hinojos.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you, counselors. And next up is R232. It approves and authorizes the filing of grant applications for multiple city departments from various grantor agencies and providing appropriations to the city. For discussion purposes, I'll move a do pass. Do we have a second? Someone raise your hand. Thank you, Councilor Bassan. I appreciate it. Thank you. Counselors, I have a question for the administration, but are there any others before we move on to that? Seeing none, I'm going to do the blind to the administration, which I think is going to be up in the mayor's conference room. I think I see some of our handy budget and DFA staff handy. I want to ask, I think the director there, if I can see, and oh, Ms. Yara, welcome back. I'm curious if you can tell us a little more about this. These grant applications normally come to us sort of one-on-one or in a packet, giving us a little more detail, but this one's a little different. It includes almost 2 pages of grant titles, but no details on how the funds would be used. Some of it is pretty routine, but other pieces like community policing, mental health grants, violent crimes task force grants, some FEMA grants for $7 million, et cetera. I understand that we haven't yet gotten any details on how those items would be spent. I wonder if the administration can tell us a little more about why these are sort of bundled as an omnibus by title, and if they have any additional information they can provide.
Yeah, there's description.
Chairman Davis, hello. How are you doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, so about 3 years ago, before you started seeing a big omnibus bill, APD was the only department that would send them to you in bulk like this, so that there weren't constant resolutions needing to be approved. There was a big effort about 3 years ago to try and actually incorporate all of those routine grants into the omnibus bill, and you should have that backup. But however, if you have a question about a specific grant, I'm sure staff here will be able to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Yara. And so we want to say also welcome back. We're glad to see you back at the city, and we know we're in good hands. So this will be a great practice. And thanks. No, I know we've been doing some of these that way. I think some of the ones that jumped out that folks were looking for maybe some more backup on were things like the law enforcement mental health grant, community police dollars, some of the dollars around, and I apologize, I pulled it out earlier and I don't have it in front of me now. But the new revenue vehicles, which I believe are the new electric buses, and those are sort of separate budget goals, I think, that the council had set aside to sort of track a little bit differently. So I don't have a real objection to the way we're doing it. It's my understanding that the administration hasn't yet provided the council with sort of all the backup documentation that might help us dig into that for questions, and I don't know what that process would look like. So I'm happy to, if counselors have any other preference, I think we just move this forward, but ask that the administration just provide some of the backup documentation, at least for the purpose and scope of the grants and how the specific dollars will be spent. Things like $7 million for revenue vehicles, I think needs a little more detail about whether that's electric or that's natural gas or what we can do, for example. And I would be okay to move this forward if we could get that before the full council meeting.
We'll give them that. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are happy to send over along the information you're missing before this item hits the full council, and we'll do that by tomorrow for you. Maybe Mr. Muniz can let us know which ones are the information you're missing.
That'd be great. Councilors, any other questions or thoughts on that item? I know we have a long agenda, don't want to drag it out, and I know most of them are routine. So with that, seeing no other, I will return to the motion for a due pass on R232. The clerk can call the roll.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
passes unanimously.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Yar, for your help. Next up, we're going to move on to item F, which is R3. This is a resolution by Counselor Pena, maybe by request, but Counselor, do you want to carry this forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure. R3 is approving and authorizing the acceptance of grant funds from the New Mexico State Library for basic state grants in aid and providing for an appropriation to the Department of Arts and Culture culture in fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll take that as a motion for a due pass, and Councilor Bassan has your second. Councilors, I know we may have questions for the administration, but we also, Mr. Moya, understand we have an individual signed up to speak on this item. And so, Mr. Moya, we're going to turn it over to you if that person is present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The individual that did sign up to speak on this item is not present at the meeting, so we can move on.
Thank you, sir. Councilors, questions or comments for the administration or council before we take a vote? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
passes unanimously.
Thank you. And councilors, in particular, Councilor Bassan, I'm sorry, I presented some of your items that I think most were by request, but councilors, if I ever jump ahead and it's one of your bills, by all means interrupt me if you want to present. Next up is item R7. This is my bill by request from the administration authorizing the bids of sale for GO bonds consisting of approximately $76 million in GO bonds from the series 2022 A, B, and D. Move a due pass. Do we have a second? Councilor Benton, thank you. Councilors, any questions for the staff or the administration? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes,
passes unanimously.
thank you, folks. Councilors, next up is items H and I. They relate to each other because they kind of can't move forward at some point. It can't get passed together. And so if it pleases the council, what I prefer to do today is let Councilor Lewis introduce his bill, which is 01, since it was filed first. We'll let public comment on this, and I believe this only on this item, but if we have any others on 09, to go ahead and speak on these two items. We'll take up both of those as one big discussion together, and then we'll act individually on each item if we determine we need to do so. So unless anybody objects, we'll take up these two items reference to the 3/8 of 1% GRT bill, and that takes us to Councilor Lewis. Welcome back, sir. 01.
And Mr. Chair, I'll move the bill, and then I'll move a committee substitute. So make a motion to move the 022-1, which is repealing enactment of number 2018-01-001, Council Bill 018-9, which imposed a 3/8% gross receipts tax.
Thank you, sir. And do we have a second? Councilor Bassan offers her second. Back to you, Councilor Lewis.
And then I'll move the committee substitute to 022-1.
And that motion for committee sub is moved. I'll second it for the sponsor's purpose. Councilor Lewis, do you want to give us any opening or presentation or move straight to public comment?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. We can move straight to public comment if you like. I mean, we've and probably just address any questions that come up from public comment and then from the other councilors there. But this is the committee sub does reduce the tax by 1/8, leaves the 1/4% tax in place, and it does designate the 60% to public safety and then 40% to homelessness initiatives. And so and there are some I did add some statistics on what the taxes generated in the first three, really in the last 4 years, but 2019, 20, and 21, what it would have generated if we left it the same over the next year, and then what it'll generate by reducing the 1/8% towards public safety and then homelessness and affordable housing. So the tax is projected to raise about $73 million over the next year. I mean, originally, I think in 2019, it raised a total of $49 million. The original tax was intended for making up for the hold harmless, which the state allowed us to try to make up for some of that, about a projected $30 million between up to 2030. And so it was about a $3 million possible shortfall per year to 2030. And so that was the authority that we were able to raise the tax from. There's also a number of other taxes that or allowable programs that the state does allow us to be able to raise taxes from. And I want to make just one other comment before we go to public or to comment. The public safety tax that was started in 2007. In 2021, it raised $43 million to public safety. That tax is projected within the next year to raise about 65 million. So a pretty significant jump from 2021 to 2022 as well. So with that, we'll go to public if there's any public comment.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Mr. Moya, I understand we have some folks for public comment, and we're going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, our speaker will be Susie Gao. Excuse me if I mispronounce your last name. But Susie, you can feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the opportunity for me to ask a question here. So I see that the bill is to basically give back 1/8 of the tax back to the people, and then 1/4 of, so they're gonna cap it, and then the money gonna go to public safety and help with homeless people. My question is, in terms of public safety, is there any plan, like what's the plan to actually improve the public safety? Because the question is recently, I mean, the crime in Albuquerque been really bad and skyrocketing last year and this year. And just a couple of days ago, Albuquerque actually was a national headline because someone stabbed 11 people in one day. So the things like, my question is really to the administration, also the city councilors. I feel like we would need maybe a future bill or something to address this crime issue in Albuquerque. And public safety, you have funding. I understand we need funding to that, but with funding, but without a good strategy, that when the money will not do much, will not do anything, honestly. So my question is, I understand that Albuquerque is like a sanctuary city, so which means it has catch and release. So somebody broke into somebody's house and then, or broke somebody's car, they don't even get arrested nowadays. So my thing is like, would city council or consider stop or end the sanctuary city catch and release policy on the crime in Albuquerque in the future bills? So that's my question. I'm not sure, it's my first time attending this kind of meeting. Not sure if I question very relevant to this bill, but really, it's a really big concern for all people in Albuquerque, the crime. So
thank you, Ms. Gao. It is relevant, and we appreciate your comment. Mr. Moore, do you have any other speakers?
No, Mr. Chair, the other individual that signed up to speak has not joined the meeting. So that'll conclude public comment.
Thank you. And Mr. Moya, while we have you, if Mr. Guessing is here for 22.2, since that relates, we're going to let him come in as well. And if he's not, we'll try to catch him if we get further in this conversation.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll let him in right now.
For folks following along at home, what we're trying to do is to be sure to keep all the conversation together about this one thing. So we're going to bend the rules a little and let folks come in to talk about it, whether they came in on Councilor Lewis's bill or Councilor Ben's bill. Mr. Guessing, good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. Chair. And so just to be clear, we're talking about 022-2?
No, sir. We're on 01 and 09, which is the gross receipts tax.
Oh, okay.
I may have misread if you're not here for that item. We're going to get to your other one next.
Well, I was told that I could only speak on 2 items, and I'm happy to speak on more, but I think I said I could speak on 22-3 and let's see, 22-2, but I don't want to hold things up. I'll just say we support the reduction of the tax of the gross receipts tax, and it would be great to have some money back in people's pockets thanks to City Council and the City of Albuquerque. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. We appreciate it, Mr. Guessing. We'll get back to you on those other 2 items as well if you're signed up, if I pulled you out of line. So, councilors, we're back on the bill for 01. Councilor Lewis, we finished public comment. If you want to get us started in more discussion, or if you'd like us to just move to other councilors, I know there will be some conversation about the other bill as well.
Do you want to move the other bill at the same time?
I don't think we can procedurally. So for the moment, we'll just leave yours on the table as substituted. We'll just have a big omnibus conversation, and then we'll take 2 votes in a row after we've all exhausted ourselves on this.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, if the other councilors have some questions, we can go to that.
Councilors, any questions or comments about this item? I see Councilor Bassan, and I believe Councilor Benton will have some comment, I'm sure, about 09. Councilor Bassan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions that go with either or both of these bills, and I've sort of discussed them already privately with the sponsors, but do we know generally how much money this has the potential of putting back into taxpayers' pockets if we were to reduce it by the 1/8?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, or the admin, anyone, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Bassan, the projection would be, it's close to $25 million, about 24,000,008, and that's with if the tax at 1/4%, I'm sorry, it goes from, if it reduces by 1/4%, right now it's the revenue projections are 73,287,000 annually. The reduction of 1/8% would take it to 48,858,000, and so that's just under $25 million. That if the tax were to raise, again, projected at 73, reduced by 1/8%, 48 million.
And thank you, Councilor Lewis. I missed, I guess I didn't say it clearly enough. Do we know an estimate of how much money will go back into an individual's pocket with this tax reduction? I mean, I could do the math, but at the same time, it's super minimal, it seems. So I think that if given the population in Albuquerque, I just was wondering, because that's something that I think is relevant of discussion and consideration. And I know that's something I've brought up, that, you know, a few dollars or $50 a year back in the pockets of taxpayers, although that might be a lot of money, if it's just these pennies here and there over time. My concern, even though this goes against so much of who I am, I mean, normally I would jump at the idea of a tax reduction, but similar to what Ms. Gao was talking about, I think that was case in point of where I'm coming from and how I feel about it is the amount of money that will get into an individual's pocket. If we were to go on the street today and ask individuals, would they rather have that in their pocket as a tax reduction, or would they rather see us efficiently and specifically, because I think that's a key point too, allocate $20 million to public safety or homelessness, or I don't know, whatever we could pick. But crime and homelessness are so important right now, and everybody knows it. It's no surprise, but it's time we really do get something done with it. So my concern is, I don't know where we're at with that. I guess the questions I have are, and maybe for the administration, Councilor Lewis, obviously, if you want to say, what are the potential impacts of reducing this tax? So if we were to get rid of the $20 million and put this back into taxpayer pockets, what is the city looking for and forward to if we were to do that? What are the impacts that we can expect?
No, good question, Councilor Bassan. Mr. Chair, if our staff, I guess, has some time to run that calculation with individual, taxpayers and the impact. I mean, I think we can get a simple, average what taxpayer might pay, in gross receipts taxes per year. I think we can run that number, but I think it is important to think of this as an overall. I mean, about $25 million that goes from the decision of the city government on where that money goes, and that money going back into the pockets of people in our city. I think if we could ask the question that if it's not significant, because it might make a difference of a few $100s per year in someone's pocket, then we can make the same case and say, well, then let's raise it by another, $30 million, or what's another $100 million of an increase on a tax if it's only going to make a certain amount of impact on an individual taxpayer's life. So I think I think the same case that could be made for reducing the tax, for not reducing the tax because it's not going to make an impact on an individual, if that's the case that someone wants to make, is the same the other way around too. So, so we have to think about it like that. I think we also have to look at the impact on our economy, the impact on just overall what this reduction could do for our economy in that regard as well. And then we also have to look, I think you raised some great questions about, are we addressing homelessness in our city? Are the dollars there to address it? Are the dollars there to address public safety? And so I think this bill makes a lot of common sense that it's not taking away the entire 3/8. And so several things. One is there is another $30 million that's directed to public safety that as of right now, there's nothing directed to public safety within the tax right now. And then about, almost $20 million that goes to homelessness initiative there. So the question that we have to ask is, are we addressing these needs with the tax that's in place? And then we also can look at the fact that if we, the council, just as it did, 4 years ago, which had tools and programs given by the state to be able to, increase revenue, took advantage of that. There are many other ways to programs that the state allows to be able to do that right now as well too. So looking at this budget year, we have to ask that question: are we sufficiently funding, public safety and homelessness and some of the needs that you addressed, and still be able to put a significant amount of money, into a tax reduction?
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Councilor Bassan, you still have the floor if you have any further comments.
Thank you. I do, Mr. Chair. And Councilor Lewis, I think that's a really valid argument about, what we're arguing one way can be equally lobbed over the opposite direction, and we need to be very cautious about that. So I am curious with the administration, what impacts they see if we were to, based off of budget and how we're going with, we just had the CBA agreement come out, an increase in APD wages. We all know we need more officers. So I am curious about the administration and how much or what they think this tax decrease could do with impacting the budget in the city. But while I'm also asking that, what do they think about the 60-40 split for public safety and homelessness too? Is that something that, where do you stand on that with the administration's perspective?
So it looks like the mayor's conference room, which I see Mr. Davis and Ms. Yar. I can't see the other heads. So.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Councilor Bassan. A very good question. I think I just want to go back 4 years ago when we implemented this tax. If you all recall, it was actually to fix the structural deficit that we identified in February of 2018. And the previous budget, there was no way we could have continued with that budget, and we needed additional revenues. And without that additional revenue, we would have continued the structural deficit. In addition to that, we had some additional need for the public safety, because that's when we realized that we need to budget for more police officers. And to appease the concern of the council, that on one hand, the council agreed that yes, there was a structural deficit, but they also, you all prioritize that we should focus on public safety with that additional revenue. And therefore, the need for 60% of the money should be spent on public safety. And we all agreed on that. Rather than 60%, the last time we sent you the report specifically on this revenue stream, almost 89% of that 3/8 tax was going to public safety. What I would like to highlight is that that commitment is already embedded in operating budget. So if you go back and reduce the tax, number one, we are going back to the structural deficit because we don't have any additional revenues or additional fund balances based on these 3/8 taxes. So once we have committed that money, even though we are not reporting it, that money is going to public safety every year, up to 89%. And then homelessness is number two priority for the administration, for the people, for the council. So if you look at last 4 years budget, the top two departments who have gotten the maximum increase in the budget, number one is public safety, and number two is family and community service, specifically on the homelessness issues. So reducing this tax will be very challenging for us, because how do we take that money back, which is already being appropriated for public safety, and it has gone up from 60 to 89%. So I think the 60-40 split is a good concept. However, we need flexibility to prioritize the public safety and homelessness, which we are already doing. I don't think this 60-40% will actually help us prioritize. In fact, it might be a little more challenging because our entire focus is on public safety and homelessness. So we urge you to have that flexibility, and we can continue or we can begin again reporting on how we are using that money. But one thing is that it's easy to identify the revenue stream related to 3/8 tax, but it is added into the bucket of general fund, and we budget the total money. We don't specifically budget the expenditure based on where the money is coming from. So in concept, we can prove that almost 89% money is going to public safety, but it is very challenging to split the money the way you are proposing. I think Stephanie has some detailed items, and Councilor Lewis, I think you're right about $25 million. I think the difference is very little. According to our estimate, this tax generates roughly $67 to $68 million. So if you reduce the tax, I think the impact would be about $22.6 million. However, it would be challenging for us to crave that money out of public safety and say, okay, now that we are reducing the tax, we are going to reduce these items from public safety budget. And it would be very challenging. On one hand, everyone is talking about giving more money to public safety, but on the other hand, reducing the tax would compel us to take money from public safety. So I'm really torn here. I on behalf of our administration, we cannot support reducing the tax. And just to give you a little example, I think this $22 million, I think Stephanie has some breakdown.
Mr. Chair.
What are the items that we might have to kind of define?
Mr. Proctor, before we go there, I want to go back to Councilor Lewis just a minute. Councilor Lewis.
Mr. Chair, I just want to be very clear. I mean, I want to, what I think I heard you say is that the mayor does not support this. Do you support any kind of tax reduction?
Councilor Lewis, not at this time. I believe we're in a very challenging time. We have.
Are you all projecting?
Councilor Lewis, hold on just a minute. We want to let everybody at least get a chance to respond, and then we'll come back to you, sir. Mr. Proctor, you want to finish that thought, then we'll go back to Councilor Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. The reason I'm not supporting it is that we are in a very unique and challenging times. We have had a lot of federal fundings in the last couple of years. That's why we were able to manage our finances. However, considering that federal funding is going to go away, it was one-time funding, which helped us to kind of balance the budget in these challenging times. But moving forward, right now, the inflation rate just for the consumer price index is 7.5%. So when we talk about increasing revenues, first of all, we don't know why this revenues is going up. It could be based on the pent-up demand. It could be also inflationary pressure on the prices, which generates more tax. But at the same time, we haven't actually looked at the inflation from the expenditure side of it, because we haven't gotten hit on that yet. But it's coming. It will come as far as all the capital projects. There is this issue with wages, which are trying to catch up with the inflation. It is still catching up. On top of that, there is an acute shortage of labor. So there will be demand for higher wages for the city employees if we want to retain them, if we want to hire them. So that has not even been accounted yet. And
Mr. Buck.
inflation will impact everything, our contracts, our operational cost, our energy cost, everything will go up. So this is the bad time, especially when the inflation is higher than almost in 1982. So this is unprecedented. This doesn't happen frequently. And this is the worst time possible to reduce our revenues. It will also send wrong signals to our rating agencies, because when your revenues are going down, they will reconsider our rating agency, our rating, and that can actually cost us more. And all the benefits that you may be thinking about, that will be wiped out by paying higher interest rates. So these are just one of the few things I'm really worried about.
Mr. Bhakta, thank you. I don't want to cut you off there, but we've got other counselors who want to follow up on those questions, and I want to get back to Councilor Lewis before we do. Councilor Lewis?
And Mr. Chair, I mean, back to administration, just briefly, are you all projecting a budget shortfall for this next year? Stephanie?
Councilor Davis, I think Councilor Davis and Councilor Lewis, it is our task to balance the budget. So within the means of revenues and, whatever expenditures that we are seeing right now, our goal would be to balance the budget. However, if we have roughly $25 million less in revenues, that would be very challenging to balance the budget. So there would be
Sure. Mr. Chair, so you're not projecting any kind of budget, shortfall right now, at least at this point, but we are projecting some increase in revenues right now. For example, the quarter-cent public safety tax, which was implemented in 2007, raised in 2021, the revenue was about 43 million. It's projected right now to be about $65 million. You mentioned earlier, we talked about the 3/8 of a cent tax that is at $59 million in 2021. It's projected to be at about $73 million. So you just take that $14 million right there, and let's go ahead and just add on the other $21 million. Are you saying that you have that spent, that you all have spent that money? So you looked at all the projected revenue increases right now, which is in the, I'm looking at just looking at those two revenue sources of about $35 million, actually $40 million, and you're saying that you have that spent?
Councilor Davis, yes. I think when we budgeted those revenues 4 years ago, it was budgeted at certain level. Now, the revenues have gone up. Similarly, the expenditure, which originally were budgeted from that has also gone up because of so just for example, let's say hypothetically, we budgeted entire $55 million for public safety. It was for additional police officer. It was for additional operational cost. All those costs have gone up higher than the percentage of increase in revenue. So you are right. The revenues have gone up, but the corresponding expenditure has gone up even higher than the revenue. So we will be able to balance the budget for FY23. Knowing that this is what the revenue is, but if we reduce by $25 million, there would be challenges, and we will have to figure out what to reduce from public safety budget.
And
Mr. Chair, we'll know exactly what the revenue projections are, regardless of the a 1/8% reduction to this revenue or not. Certainly, when we go into our budget time, we'll know what those projections are. In that regard, we'll have some ideas of what our costs going to be, and it's the council's job to be able to pass that budget, and we will pass a balanced budget. We have to, of course, according to our law. And so, council, we can go on to other, or Ms. Chair, we can go on to other councilors. And
thank you, Councilor Lewis. I appreciate that line of questioning. If councilors don't have any other question, I have one on Councilor Lewis's bill, and then I want to move us over to the other bill as well. Councilor Pena, I see you in the queue here. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. So Remind me, maybe for Counselor Lewis or the administration, the hold harmless was a tax that we can impose based on the state taking away that hold harmless. So with the 3/8, I know there's other opportunities for us to tax with different opportunities to be able to do that. But with the hold harmless, if we reduce it, are we saying we can keep, if we tax the entire 3/8 tax, we can keep it into perpetuity, and not that we will, but I'm just saying. And then if we were to reduce it, we could never go back to that opportunity. Is that correct? For whomever. Then my other question is how much of every $100 spent will end up in the pockets of our constituents at the end of the day if we do reduce it? And then, looking at these numbers, we're given a sheet with some numbers of the money that's spent throughout the thing since 2019. And we have 60-40. So to say that it's actually split at 60-40, and it seems as though my recollection is that we spent more on public safety than the 70%, but I could be wrong. So if you can clarify on that. And then what is that other 40% being spent on? I know Mr. Bhakta just said that it's actually been used for family and community. And so in its totality, I look at it as that's part of public safety as well, right? Not everybody sees it that way, but I do. If we're using that for some of the services provided to address some of the underlying issues, I see that as public safety. So I don't know if everyone has a copy of this sheet of paper that was prepared by, I don't know who, if it was the administration or our staff, but it's basically down the line from 2019 to 2020-21 saying 60-40. And I just like some clarification on that. And then the other question.
Mr. Boxer, Councilor Lewis, do you have?
I wanted to address at least the first question, but you remind me what that one was. I could just briefly, and I'll remember.
It was how much of every $100 spent will end up in our constituents' pocket?
That was the second one. What was the first one?
The first one, the whole harmless tax, the 3/8.
Oh yeah. Thank you, and Ms. Chair and Council Pena. So I think it's important to keep in mind that the council 4 years ago utilized the program that the state provided to be able to make up for the going away, some of that going away tax. And that was, again, it was projected to be about $30 million over 10 years, over more than 10 years at the time. So it was up until 2030. So you can look at that as about trying to make up for, the state allowed us to be able to make up for that. Let's just say about $3 million per year. And so, but the council was able to use that, was authorized to be able to use that tax. And you're correct that we have a handful of other programs that we could utilize or authorized to use under the state's, gives us authority to be able to increase the GRT in that way. So that program, well, my understanding is that program did go away, the specific hold harmless program. And so reducing it by 1/8%, you're correct that we would not be able to use that program again, partly because it's just not there anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. But we do have a handful of other programs that we could utilize to increase it. So.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Before we go back to Councilor Pena to follow up, I want to give the administration a chance to respond to those other questions. If they have any response quickly or briefly.
Mr. Chair and Councilor Pena, to answer your question on hold harmless, you're right. It goes down by roughly $2.3 million a year. And the provision of 3/8 was to compensate for that reduction in hold harmless payment to the municipalities every year. So by fiscal year 2030, our hold harmless impact, which is a gradual decline of distribution, will be up to $35 million. And that is the reason, the state allowed the municipalities to have this 3/8 capability to compensate for that reduction in revenues. However, we used it for structural deficit, which we had in 2018. And we used it to dedicate it to public safety because that was very issue number one at that time. And then homelessness is another issue. What I'm trying to say is that we have been using it for public safety more than it was required because the need is recognized by everyone, by people, by council, by administration. So there is no dispute where we should use this money. And now we are so much into it and we have dedicated it already as far as the recurring expenses in public safety that I don't see how we would.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, look, Councilor Lewis, I want to give Mr. Baca a chance to finish his comment and then we'll come
I
back.
think just a comment. I think that didn't we want to go to our staff to answer those questions at the, this is really just an opinion of the administration. I thought we were going to go to our staff to answer some of the technical questions that Councilor Pena had.
Okay, Councilor Lewis, if our staff, if you or Councilor Pena has some of our staff available or ready to respond to those questions, we can call on them, but otherwise the administration has got some technical stuff there. So Mr. Baca, if you want to finish that comment, I want to come back really quickly to Councilor Pena who has the floor and her questions. And then we'll move on to let her finish and we'll move on to other councilors.
Mr. Chair, I actually lost my train of thought. So I think I'm done with my answer, unless Councilor Pena has a specific question, which I forgot to answer.
Mr.
I'll be happy to.
I suspect you'll get your the floor back again in a minute, Mr. Baca. Councilor Pena, you still have the floor for your questions if you have any follow-up.
So, Mr. Chair, there was a couple of questions that weren't really answered, and then I'm interested, I mean, I'm open to hearing from our staff because I think that it was our staff who prepared this information. So, I'd like to hear from both administration and the staff, but, I'd asked the question about the, how much of, out of every $100, how much would end up in our constituents' pockets, and then about the distribution of the tax. Like I said, I have kind of a straight 60-40 here on the list that I have in front of me. And I understood, some of it for the structural debt, but then it seems as though it wasn't just a complete 60-40 at that point either. So based on what Mr. Baca just said. So if our staff, I think I just, I don't know if Jesse's here.
I think Mr. Moniz is joining us. I'm sorry, Council, I didn't mean to cut you off. Mr. Moniz, if you could take those, my math says that for every $100, taxpayers would save a quarter that wouldn't go to the city. Is that right? For the first question that we know of.
Thank you, Councilor Davis. Calculating that for every $10 spent, it would be a 1 cent savings if you reduce the tax by 1/8. So we kind of take it from there in terms of what the savings would be on the tax. To answer the question on the table that was provided in the write-up, so we took the actual revenue.
If you don't mind, Mr. Moniz, I was just wanted for, I know what it would actually be. I just for the public to know how much it would be. I just kind of wanted it stated for every $100.
Okay.
Okay. And Mr. Moniz and Councilor Pena, you had some other questions about the budget and how it had been used in the 60-40 split. Mr. Moniz, can you respond to that or do you need it restated?
No, I can respond to that. So again, we took the actual revenues for the hold harmless over fiscal years 2019, 20, and 21, and we just generated a table that indicated based on the original legislation, if 60% were to go to public safety, what was that dollar figure? And so per the table, you can see in 2019, it was just under 30 million. For 2020, it was just over 31 million. And in 2021, it was roughly 35.5 million. And then the calculation said, well, what was the remaining 40% out of that? And so again, the table provides if the split was as intended in the legislation, what those amounts would have been. So again, just under 20 million for 2019, just over 20 million in 2020, and then about 23.5 million for 2021. So we just wanted to show the breakout of what that would have looked like if it would have stayed true to the legislation in terms of how it was first approved and generated. It does sound like, based on what the administration says, that they used funds for public safety beyond 60%, but this was just to kind of give everyone an idea of what those numbers would look like. And then we did provide the table of if you took those same revenues over the 3 years that we talked about, and the tax was reduced by 1/8, what would those numbers look like? What would they have looked like? And so again, going back in 2019, we would have generated 33 million in 2019, 34 million in 2020, and almost 40 million last fiscal year. And then we also broke that down into a 60-40 split in terms of what that would look like. So those tables were to provide the information on what that looked like. So I hope that explains or clarifies where those numbers came from.
Thanks. Councilor Pena?
So this isn't actually based on numbers. This was just,
The revenues in the table are actual revenues. That's what was recorded in fiscal years 2019, 20, and 21.
correct, but you just, after that, just did a 60-40 split? Or you based it on actual numbers?
Oh, it was just a 60-40 split. It wasn't, it was just based on the revenues collected. So again, it went back to the legislation indicated that 60% of the revenues were to be used for public safety. So we broke the table out into those two numbers.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess then my follow-up question is to the administration, because it was my understanding that this is how it was allocated. So does the administration have some of the numbers in terms of how it was allocated? Whether, was it 60%? Was it more than 60% in public safety, which people consider public safety in terms of, APD or with the cultural services?
And excuse me, and Mr. Baca, I'll try to narrow your answer here a little bit. I know you touched on this before with the actual percentage that was generated in public safety, but can you give us a really brief recap of how the actual allocations have played out? I think that's what Councilor Pena is asking.
Want me to go?
Thank you, Chair Davis, and thank you, Councilor Pena. I think overall, as Mr. Muniz mentioned, the requirement was to spend at least 60% on public safety. The administration went above and beyond and spent almost up to 89% on public safety. With that, I'm going to hand over to Ms. Yara to kind of give little details.
Yeah, so after, of course, that up to 89% was used for public safety, the rest of it kind of just falls into general fund to allocate to the rest of the departments. I would guess that a lot of that probably went to family if we split it out that way. Another thing I think counselors should be aware of is upcoming wage negotiations they've already been done that we need to honor. So with the APOA and 911 operators and M-Series negotiations that just happened, we're looking at about a $17.1 million increase in wages just for those three contracts. In addition to that, we're seeing the issue papers for the FY23 budget coming through. And we have about almost $42.5 million of asks from public safety departments, including APD, AFR, the ACS department, family, and DMD as it relates to the Gateway Gibson project. So, and a lot of that is new positions and salaries. So we will have a big job of balancing the budget. Reduction of this revenue would just make that harder for us.
Thank you, Mr. R. Councilor Pena, you still have the floor, although we want to keep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that's kind of what I understood it to be a little different as well. So, if it's 89% it's going to public safety, and then you have another 11% that's going to other items, and that may be family and community. It's just difficult to really look at how we cut when yet we have this other pending legislation moving forward in terms of pay for APOA. Would some of that money actually come out of here as well? That pay increase?
Mr. Muniz or Ms. Yara?
Mr. Chair, yes, it would be the plan of the administration to use that money to fund, first of all, police, and then if we had anything left, I doubt there would be much left after.
Thank you, Ms. Yara.
Thank you. Councilors, any other questions on Councilor Lewis's bill before we go back to the sponsor? And then we're going to move on to Councilor Benton's bill before we close this. Councilor Lewis, I have a question on your bill, and it looks like Councilor Benton does as well. Would you like to hear those briefly before we let you respond and move on to the other bill, or do you need to respond?
Well, I'm just comment briefly, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Based on some of the comments from the administration. Usually about this time or the next month, there's projections that would come from Mr. Baca or Ms. Yara. And right now, I don't think there's any indications that that they're projecting any kind of a shortfall. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if you are, but there are times when there have been years when we projected $150 million shortfalls to our budget. Other times where it was $30 million shortfalls to our budget. We're not projecting those kinds of shortfalls this year, and in fact, we are projecting some larger revenues than we've ever experienced before. And I mentioned some of them earlier. And what usually happens is and this is why this falls on the council to be able to make these decisions, because I would bet $1,000 on the fact that the administration is not going to come to us in the next month and say, hey, guess what? I think that we're going to have more money than we need. And we think that the council should look at budgeting for $20 million less than what we think we're going to need, and then let's go ahead and give that back to the taxpayers. That's just not going to happen. So this is up to us to take the lead on this and to be able to set some parameters and looking at our revenues, looking at our projections. This is far different than what Mr. Baca mentioned, where there was in 2018 a structural deficit, a projected structural deficit. We're nowhere in that category or even close to it, right now. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you have some questions.
Thanks, Councilor Lewis. Mr. President, Councilor Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess quick follow-up with Mr. Baca or Ms. Yara. To clarify, with regard to the 89% having gone to APD, was that over all three the recent years, or was that only coming out of the chute the first year or so?
Is that Ms. Yara or who's responding?
This is Sanjay. You're right, Councilor Benton. The last budget, FY21, is when that was the last report that we sent to the council. And that is when we showed that we spent 89% of the 3/8 revenue stream on public safety. And while I have this opportunity, I think Councilor Pena had a question earlier that how much of $100 spent, if there is a tax reduction, will go into taxpayers' pocket. For every $100, it would be roughly 10 cents, which will go to taxpayers' pocket.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Councilor Benton, back to you, sir.
I think that was my only question, but I think the answer, though, with regard to whether it's 89 or if it's only 60 after the public safety budget, where that goes, and Ms. Yara answered correctly that it basically goes into the general fund. So I'll make a little bit of pitch for. Well, first of all, I agree with the arguments that we should keep it, but I'm specifically concerned about housing and homelessness. And that's the reason that I've been very focused on identifying a dedicated funding stream. The administration made these decisions because the language was at least for public safety. But and we may need to talk about that language in either of these bills or any bill that comes out of them together. But there is a huge need, identified need and documented, of the need for housing vouchers. The estimated number of those housing vouchers is around 22,000 currently, or excuse me, 2,200 currently. And those are for supportive housing vouchers only. That's not even counting people who may be rent burdened or in danger of falling through the cracks and into homelessness. Families that are, as they call it, rent burden, where a large percentage of their budget is inordinately large percentage is going to their housing. So, you can do the straight math on those 2,200, and the average on a supportive housing voucher, the average cost per voucher is about, has been estimated about 15,000. That's by our own Family Community Services Department. That's surprisingly close to around the 29 million that we're talking about annually in the upcoming budget. And that's the reason why I feel like we've got to, I really appreciate Councilor Lewis and his floor set acknowledging this challenge that we have. But I think it's bigger than that. And for that reason, I think the percentage, at least in the bill that I'm sponsoring along with Councilors Davis and Feeblecorn is the right figure for that dedicated revenue stream. It's not a one-off. We did a couple of things a few years as a council where we identified a bunch of housing vouchers, but they were only for a year. And so that doesn't get us really anywhere. I mean, they might help for some emergency situations for a year, but these are the identified recurring needs for housing. That's just an example. It's not that we would spend necessarily all of that 40% on housing vouchers. We're trying to keep the language clear that it's to meet our city's housing goals, and that would be just a part of it. But that's just some easy math there. If you wanted to do it, that's an actual need that we know, and pretty close in terms of how the revenues are projected to fund such a need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. And before we go back to councilors who've already commented, and Councilor Lewis, I'm going to give us a chance to come back and circle back and do all this at once with you. I want to make a couple of comments since I haven't spoken, and then I'll come back to Councilor Bassan, who has, and then we'll let Councilor Lewis close to respond. And if we need some additional debate with Councilor Lewis's comments, we'll do that as well. I have one quick question for the administration up in the mayor's conference room, but let me ask Ms. Yara or Mr. Davis or whomever can answer. I know the mayor hasn't released the proposed budget for next FY23 yet, but last year when we were designing the community safety budget, there was a ballpark projection of what it would cost to fully staff that agency. Do either one of you remember ballpark what that would be in order to fully staff that in the new fiscal year?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I don't remember the number from last year, but their current ask to bump up staffing for FY23 is $8 million. That would include staffing and all the equipment they would need.
Perfect. And thank you, Ms. Yara, for being on top of that. Ms. Yara or Mr. Davis, if you know, do either one of you recall the full dollar amount to fund the new APOA contract?
Yes, so the recurring provisions of that contract would be 12.8 million once fully implemented. And there is a one-time cost of probably about 1.3 for the incentive to stay in the same area command.
Thank you, Ms. Yara. I'll pull all that together. It's just under 20 million or so in new public safety costs that are coming online in our new fiscal year. So, I have to say, I think I agree with Councilor Bassan in this, that I agree with Councilor Benton and appreciate Councilor Lewis in this. I think we've the different versions of these bills, both the one that Councilor Benton and Councilor Feeblecorn and I have, and the one that Councilor Lewis has presented, have really started off in very different directions. And we've really bridged that gap and that chasm by recognizing that we need to devote dollars to public safety and to housing. I was reminded that Councilor Jones and Councilor Sanchez and I were the one that proposed the 60-40 split originally, the dedication, the 60% public safety dedication in the original tax when the new mayor proposed it at the beginning of his last term, because we didn't just want to give the mayor a blank check. We wanted to be sure that new dollars went to public safety programs. And although at the time we needed to include a sunset in order to pass that 60% set aside, the administration has kept that up, at least on paper. At the end of the day, it all goes to the general fund, and you just got to show that you use some of that. But I think in my experience, it's been that if we don't at least give a floor, at least we don't say you have to at least spend this much on something, sometimes things move aside. And I think housing has not kept up with that public safety. I agree with Councilor Benton. We have lots of capital dollars. We lack, honestly, it appears to use the administration's word, the structural support of recurring revenue to expand the operating costs and the staffing costs to do that. And we're bringing the Gibson Center online, and hopefully many more of these centers. And so in that regard, I think we're in this position because we received a federal windfall, as did every other large city in the country and the state. We've been able to put that into some to try to make up for some social inequities, to recover our revenue loss, to cover city staffing. But that should not be counted on as long term. And I think Councilor Lewis made an excellent point that there will be future years where we're going to have a deficit. And I think if we did have extra dollars, it behooves us as a council with money to put it into the reserve and not necessarily to cut our legs out from under us where we have to make harder decisions down the road. So for that reason, I realize that the motion on the floor is still, we need to approve Councilor Lewis's floor sub and then take up the motion. But my inclination would be that we do not pass this bill, that we move the other bill perhaps with no rec, so the full council can finish this conversation. But I do think those set asides are important. And I think that the benefit in the pocket of the individual taxpayer, 10 cents on the $100 is not worth shortcutting our future in our city. And I think it's important for this council to stand up and put our values and our priorities in order. So that I expect that will be my vote today. Councilor Bassan, you were next. And then if we don't have any other comment, we'll let Councilor Lewis respond, carry us forward, and then close on his bill as he sees fit. Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I definitely do have questions more towards 09. So this is, I totally get it.
Let's take those anyway, because they all relate, I think.
Okay, good. Because so with the language as this bill says, with this 40% going to affordable housing goal priorities, I understand that the city council has approved our city priorities. I get why and where that's coming from, but it is kind of a vague priority when it comes to what we need. So when we talk about it, though, it sure does seem to get more specific. And that's what I would be hoping that we could do, is figure out not how to bind the budget to a 60-40 split at this point, even because we're hearing the administration already saying we're at 89% versus 11%, which I still don't think I agree with that being okay either. I recognize homelessness is creeping up real close to a number one priority. Like, how do you say number one and number two at this point when it comes to homelessness or people that are facing near homelessness, to what Councilor Benton was saying? So I guess I'm really hoping that we can define what affordable housing goals really are. Does that mean supportive housing vouchers only? Does that mean building supportive housing or building more affordable housing? So I don't know, Councilor Benton, if you can kind of help me understand that a little bit more and what we're looking for when we're talking about 40% towards that. I think it would be easier to make it a little more palatable.
Chair, should I answer or you want to?
Councilor Benton, if you can, go ahead.
Okay. I used an example of the 2,200 vouchers, right? And it would not be spent just on vouchers, most likely. We have numerous community partners that are involved in the delivery of these services. Now, I've been told by those community partners that they could get those vouchers out on the street. But besides vouchers, there are a lot of other needs with housing, both just regular affordable housing or supportive housing. And with regard to your comment on capital, use of it for capital, I don't know that it would be appropriate because it's recurring funds, whereas capital, we have sources of capital funding. We have federal sources, we have state sources, we have our own CIP, whereas the real gap is in operations. So besides just the vouchers that are needed, there are things like that we're having discussions already, and we can, if we could get this full council, I suppose we would want to get Family and Community Services present to slice and dice this, and maybe some of the providers. But things like landlord incentives, some of the housing, whether it's for a person who's in recovery, or just a person who needs an affordable dwelling unit, or a family that needs affordable dwelling unit, we're having a hard time getting private landlords to accept those people, or to accept a person that has a voucher in their hand, because they're stigmatized, as being more problematic as a tenant than someone else. There are a lot of things of that nature where we can incentivize private landlords to help us with the most needy, and things like even including subsidized property insurance for landlords who are willing to take affordable housing vouchers. And then, of course, just the daily operations of some of our, we're building some pretty good projects, and I think there's a lot of ideas as how do we keep producing new dwelling units, and how we add to that stock. But that stock of dwelling units needs operational revenue as well, just paying the bills, paying the upkeep and maintenance and operations personnel to operate these housing programs. So I think that's the answer. Is there a plan laid out? I think there's a lot of planning being done by the Department of Family and Community Services and by the Homeless Coordinating Council, which is another resource. We've got a lot of people paying attention to that, and we've got good partners there in the county and the university. But we could probably ask that same question about the police budget. What is the plan? And as opposed to just, we need a lot of money for it. So I share that. I appreciate that question, and I'm happy to work on fleshing this out if we need to within this bill. I think normally we would appropriate it and appropriate to the housing goal, and then it's up to us and up to the administration to keep our departments feet to the fire to show us that it's being used appropriately. But everything I know is that we can use this amount of funding and a lot more for affordable housing operations.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. Councilor Lewis, you were next, and we've held you off for a minute.
Mr. Chair, can I just respond to that?
I'm sorry, Councilor Bassan, go ahead. You still have the floor.
Thank you. So I frankly am, and this is because you're triggering the memory that I want to start saying this like every second of every day, is I'm tired of planning. I'm so tired of hearing about planning. Like, let's do something already. So I think that's what both of these bills are trying to do in a lot of ways. So I'm definitely ready to figure out how to get money to somewhere to make a difference when it comes to improving crime and reducing homelessness in Albuquerque, whether that be through any of the ideas you listed just now, Councilor Ben. But the one thing I would like to say, because I don't think either of these are ready. So whether it be without recommendation, which is, I'm going to come back at all of you if we pass both of these without rec today. But at the same time, you just, Councilor Benton mentioned Family and Community Services. We can get them together before the council meeting and we can slice and dice it. You said, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing right now? Let's get Family and Community Services to help us slice and dice this so that before it goes before full council, we have it to where we're more comfortable with it. So I think we're on the right track with either or one. I mean, obviously it's not both, but I think that both of these are on the right track. But I don't fully agree with them as the way they stand. So that's where I'm at right now, but I'm happy to slice and dice a little bit more in committee if you want.
Thank you, Councilor Bassan. Councilor Lewis, we've held you off for a minute. I want to give you a chance to respond to some of those questions, and then Councilor Pena behind you, and then we are going to try to vote on your floor sub and then see where we take this bill. Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad to wrap up. And I would like to actually recommend that we pass the substitute, that we actually substitute the bill, and to move it on without recommendation to the full council. I think both these bills are really designed to a lot of that slice and dice and focusing, should happen in our budget process. I mean, that is a part of it. But we're putting some general categories on here, and I'm also open to, right now, I mean, both these bills designate some subcategories under family and community services. I mean, I'd even be willing to look at a more broader, that 40% that could include, or maybe even be comfortable looking at that 40% going to family and community services department, where we can, in the budget time, that's when we can really, fine tune some of those dollars that would go to either those vouchers, affordable housing, or even emergency shelter services for that matter. I mean, all these would, I think, apply to some of the things that we're wanting to accomplish here right now. But I would ask of the administration, well, first of all, normally we would get a 5-year forecast about right now. So I would ask when we're going to see that 5-year forecast. Usually in that 5-year forecast, again, we're projecting, and usually it comes in pretty harsh, to be honest. Usually it's projecting, shortfalls, or it's pretty conservative in that way, but haven't seen that yet. And then also my understanding is that in our first quarter of this budget year that we are reverting $18 million to the general fund. And so I would seriously doubt, at least in that first quarter, that 89% of this tax went to public safety. In fact, I'm certain that it didn't, but I would like to see an itemized list of that 89%. I think that would be critical and important, not just for these purposes, but also to our budget process as we move forward, as we come upon that as well. And so, but I would like us, I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want to, again, move the other bill, or if we need to actually just substitute this bill, and then I'm glad to make a motion to move it on to full council that way.
Sure. Let me take Councilor Pena, who's been waiting patiently in the wings. If she has anything further, we'll let you, and then we'll come back and do your sub, Councilor Lewis, and we'll see what the pleasure of the committee is. Councilor Pena, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just hearing everyone talk back and forth, whether it gets deferred, whether it moves on with no rec, whether 1, whether 2, it's my understanding that both of them can move forward with no rec. But, I'd be inclined to support Councilor Bassan. We actually haven't even went through the budget process yet. We don't even know what the budget's going to look like. And here we're talking about this tax. I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse in terms of, what opportunities there were. We had a $110 million GRT bond that Councilor Bassan and I had put forward, and there was 25 million in there for housing. And so I guess in terms of that would have been capital, but then I think Councilor Benton had later said that he would like to use it for operations, which would have totaled up to 4.5 million in the entire $110 million bond for operations, which would have been $4 to $5 million per year. So, when we're looking at operations, I guess one question would be, is that would this 40% be dedicated completely for operations in terms of that monetary amount, if it's some arbitrary number like that, 13 million? If not, I would say that, I'd like to make a motion to defer the bill and keep it in committee and slice and dice it up as Councilor Bassan suggested.
Councilor Pena, if it's okay with you, and again, I think the motion to defer takes priority, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to be able to let Councilor Lewis substitute his committee sub first, just so he has the bill he needs, and then I could return to you if that would be okay, unless you'd like to make that motion now.
Sure.
Okay. Councilor Lewis, I think we've about exhausted our debate on these questions, and I think we are back on the motion on the floor, which is to move your sub. So just to give the sponsor his bill, unless you have another preference, Councilor Lewis, I think we need to vote on that, and then we'll come back to disposition of the substituted bill. Is that okay?
Mr. Chair, I want to, again, move this committee sub.
Thanks. Seeing no objection, we'll ask the clerk to call the roll of the committee.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Davis.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
So folks, we're a little wily here and it's been a while since I've done this, but the motion on the floor is still from Counselor Lewis to do pass the bill now as substituted, I presume. But Counselor Pena had a motion, I think, but Counselor Lewis, go ahead. And then I might ask Mr. Melendres to jump in with me if I screw this up.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I don't believe there's a motion at all on the floor right now on it. In fact, and again, I would like to move this to the full council, without rec. And I believe actually that both these bills, I think it's important that, look, this work in our committee is extremely important. But it's also important that the full council weighs in, on these two. But I mean, rather than any other motion on this bill right now, since we have discussed both bills at the same time, I would recommend that they both move in at the same time. And so if I don't know if we can make a motion on the other bill at this time as well, or table this until we do the next one. But I don't look, I want to defer this. I don't want to move it without rec unless I know that the other bill would have the same kind of action.
All right, Councilor Lewis, what's your motion at the moment? What do you want to do here? We can either table this, discuss the other one and come back, or do you want to just make a motion to send it to council with no rec? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well,
we don't know what we're going to do on the other one until we dispose of this one. So we got to do something here.
Well, we also put both of these on the table at the same time, Mr. Chair, and so that's why I'm wondering how we conclude each one in this committee meeting. Then, if we put both of them on the table, we could discuss them both at the same time. Then what motions do we make next? And so I guess maybe some direction from.
Let me ask Mr. Councilor Benton what his preference might be on his other bill. Then I'm going to come back to Mr. Melendres if we don't have an agreement. If the other sponsor has a similar motion, we might just do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and up to you as well as a co-sponsor of that bill. But I'm happy to move that bill to full council as well. I think that's the place to really, where we've got all the departments present, police and everybody else. I mean, they weren't obviously necessarily invited to this, and maybe that's our bad, but I think I do agree with one thing, and that is with Councilor Lewis, absolutely, that in this type of bill to try to start designating every piece of what the revenue would be would not be appropriate. That's appropriate as part of the operating budget process. My arguments about a number of vouchers have to do to illustrate the sheer need, and that's only one part of the need, and this would meet it. But my intention would be to move the ordinance 9 to ordinance 9 to the full council, also without recommendation. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd be happy to see them both move forward without recommendation and continue to debate both bills.
I'd rather us settle it and I hear that. Thank you, councilors. But I'd rather us settle it, even if that may be a deferment. Hearing from Councilor Pena to see if all the sponsors can get together on a consolidated bill. Councilor Bassan, do you have a preference or a motion? Somebody has to get us going here. Otherwise, I'm going to make one.
Fine. I'd like to make a motion and move it to Cal so that we can discuss it along with the budget.
Mr. Melendres, is that a motion we can do? I thought that usually a president's motion.
Come on.
Mr. Chair, the city council can refer to committee. However, the committees don't have authority to refer to committee. So if that's something that the council wanted to do at its next meeting, it could. In the meantime, I checked with Mandy, who's clerking this meeting, and we have the motion on the floor noted as a do pass by Councilor Lewis. That was the main motion. The secondary motion was for the committee substitute, which you now have settled. So you're back on the main motion. And so if Councilor Lewis, you'd like to change your motion you can do that with the concurrence of your seconder, who was Councilor Bassan. Or if you'd like to withdraw that motion, then there would be no motion on the floor for the bill, in which case the council could take up some other business, including O22-2 if it so chose. But then also there would be the opportunity for any other motion on O22-1 in the event that you withdrew. So if folks are comfortable with the idea that these will move forward without rec, then perhaps that would be the most appropriate thing to do, is to amend your motion, Councilor Lewis, to no recommendation with concurrence of the person who seconded, and then take it from there.
And before we do that, Councilor Pena has a thought, and she kind of had a motion a minute ago.
I had a motion to defer.
Yep. Is there, we put a pause on that just to get the committee sub in. Councilor Bassan, I think, is that a second?
No, Mr. Chair, can we please, the actual motion that's on the floor right now, Mr. Melendez, is to move the committee substitute, correct? And that was seconded. Can we take a vote on that?
Mr. Chair, you would be able to, but you've got a motion and a second now for deferral, which takes precedent. So that's the motion on the floor.
So I'd ask the I guess Councilor Bassan's motion deferral for let us substitute this bill.
It's actually Councilor Pena. So Councilor Pena, would you like to let the sponsor substitute, and then I'll return to you for the motion on deferral, because we put you off there while we were sorting this out.
Mr. Chair, the bill has been substituted.
I thought so too. Did we not? We did that. Yeah. So now we're on the deferral. Yeah.
We're on the deferral. We're on the deferral now. And I intend to make the same motion for the other bill as well.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Lewis.
Did we need to take a roll on substitute the bill?
We did.
And we did do that?
Yes. And you have a substituted bill now, sir.
A lot of time that passed in between then.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is for a deferral with a second from Councilor Bassan. So that takes precedent. So if there's discussion on the motion for a deferral until our next FGO meeting, I assume that's what Councilor Pena wants. That would be the motion on the floor for the substituted bill. And Councilor Pena intends to make the same motion on the other bill for what it's worth. As a co-sponsor of the other bill, I don't object to that unless my co-sponsor does. Is there any other discussion on the motion for deferral for 30 days or until our next FGO meeting? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion to defer.
Councilor Bassan.
Yes.
Councilor Benton.
No.
Councilor Lewis.
No.
Councilor Pena.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
Okay. Thank you, councilors. I think we're not quite there yet, but Councilor Ben 09, which will take up the same matter in a different bill. Councilor Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'll go through the exercise again. I'll move that 09 move without recommendation before council.
And I'll second that motion. Is there further discussion or additional motions?
And I will move the floor substitute for this bill.
Thank you, sir. I'll second the floor sub as a co-sponsor. Councilors, any discussion about the motion to move the committee sub for 01? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Councilor Lewis.
Was there going to be a motion to defer this bill? And Councilor Pena said that she would move to defer this bill the same way she did the other one.
I think that's the intent, but I think the motion is for the substitution first.
Substitute.
Mr. Chair, actually, point of order, I think the first motion that he made was to send it with no rec to the city council. I think that motion is the one that has to be acted on first. And then he made a motion to substitute.
Point of order. I can after the main motion is moved and seconded, then I made a motion to substitute the bill. So that's what's before. That's what's on the floor.
Yes, and that being on the floor, I think, Mr. Melendez, we can still, just like we did on the other one, we can take a motion to defer here as well if we choose. Is that correct? Because that would take precedence.
Yeah, Chair, that's correct. The motion on the floor is for the substitute, but at any time, if somebody were to make a deferral motion, then the item would be moved at that time if that motion passes. And if it were to pass at this time, when you take it up at your next meeting, the first order of business would be the substitute.
Thanks, folks. It's been a while since we've done all this. Y'all hang on with us a minute. Counselor Pena, I think you're going to have a motion here.
Yes, Mr. President, but I would like to see it substituted first. That's why I was trying to get clarification on the order of the motions, because I'd like to see it substituted, and then I would make a motion for deferral after the substitution.
I don't agree. I mean, I understand, ma'am, and if that's how we want to proceed, that's fine. But I don't think we finished substituting Counselor Lewis's bill, so this would leave them in the same spot. So,
Mr. Chair, we did substitute.
oh, we did. I'm sorry. Okay, my notes are as backwards as everybody else. Thanks. All right. So the motion on the floor is for the substitution, and there is no discussion. Missy No Host, if you caught all that, would you give us a roll call vote for the substitution, please?
Yes, sir. Counselor Basan,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Yes.
Counselor Pena,
Yes.
Counselor Davis.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
We are back on Counselor Benton, who presented the motion. I see the mayor's conference room wants to add a piece, and I see Counselor Pena will have a motion. So we'll go to the mayor's conference room.
Chair Davis, I was just wondering, would it be possible to get an email or email us a copy of the floor or the committee stuff?
We'll take care of that after the meeting. Thank you, sir. Since it looks like you're going to have another 30 days to look at it, we'll be sure to get that to you. Counselor Pena, do you have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for deferral.
So noted for 30 days or our next meeting. Counselor Lewis, are you a second there, or do you have a comment?
I'll second. I'll make a comment.
Counselor Lewis, go ahead. You have a second and a comment.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Just two quick comments to the requests of administration is first of all, when are you going to give us the 5-year forecast? When do you see that completed, and how long will it take you to give that to the council? And then second, can you give me a timeline for when you would be able to present to us an itemized list of the 89% of the 3/8% tax currently in this budget year that's gone to public safety? And if you have an idea of that right now, if you could let me know on the 5-year forecast and then itemized list for the 89%.
Mr. Bogdan, Ms. Yar, or Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chair, Counselor Lewis, this is Isaac Padilla. The 5-year forecast is currently being reviewed, and we expect to possibly introduce it at the coming up meeting, the meeting that's coming up next week. If not, it'll be introduced at the first meeting in March.
And on the other question, Mr. Padilla, if you know it.
Mr. Chair, this is Stephanie. So actually, an itemized list of those expenditures for the 89.9% was submitted to council in EC-21-85. And that was part of the reporting that OMB has been giving you, in lieu of that other bill that got withdrawn. So EC-21-85 will give you the detail breakdown.
When was that introduced?
I'm sorry, that's EC-20-85. And that was in November. It was approved November 16th, 2020. And the number and allocations have not changed since that time.
Ms. Chair, so that was presented back in November. Lots happened between now and then. So I would want to verify also currently that has not changed. We want to verify. So if your staff would work with our staff, and I want to make sure that we can just a very detailed itemized list of 89% of that specific tax that went to public safety. So you're saying that our staff could extrapolate that directly from that report that you gave us in November, Ms. Yar?
Mr. Chair and Councilor Davis, yes, we can work with Mr. Muniz to get an updated list, but a lot of the items on that list are salaries for officers. So that kind of remains unchanged, but we can certainly get that updated for you.
So, okay. I mean, I have questions, Mr. Chair, questions certainly on, because because that revenue could have come from other sources. It could have come from the general fund.
Councilor
others.
Lewis,
So,
I understand. I'm going to cut you off here because they've given us an answer and we're going to have to follow up, but we want to take a comment on the motion to defer until our next meeting, but.
I'll make one comment for it and I'm done. But just a reminder, when we passed this, or when the council passed this tax, just a note, back in 2014, it was several months before the budget year. So this money was passed with this additional revenue, with 60% going to public safety, and none of it was sliced and diced. So it was put out there in that way, a very general way. And then when the budget year came, the administration had an opportunity to make some of those. And so that's a very appropriate pathway for these bills to follow as well, that we would give some direction, make some outlines on where we want these dollars to go. And then with our committee, and I think Councilor Bassan's right, that we want to deal with it in the committee of the whole. But I think that we've got to pass some parameters here, first of all, and that's what these bills do.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilor Lewis. We have a couple other bills that I know are going to take some time, so I want to be sure we can take up this motion here. And if the motion to defer passes, we're going to move on to another topic. Councilor Pena to close on the motion to defer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we should just move for the deferral. I'd ask for everyone's support. I think with Councilor, I appreciate Councilor Lewis's comments. I would have actually supported a no rec of both of them to full council, but after hearing, that we really do lack a lot of information. I think Councilor Davis said it. He agreed that it just wasn't quite ready. So I think there's some additional information that would be crucial to making a decision to maybe at that point even move it on to full council with no rec, either one or both bills. I think it's just important to have as much information as possible available. That way, when we hand it over to the full council, they have a good understanding of where the money has been spent and what the intention is to do with the money moving forward. So thank you. I urge your support.
Thank you, Councilor Pena. Councilor, seeing no other discussion, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion to defer until our next FGO meeting, which is about 30 days from now.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
No.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you, councilors. Let's take a deep breath. Moving on to O2. Councilor Lewis, this is your item for updating the Civil Emergency Powers Ordinance. Would you like to present it?
Mr. President, just a moment. Yeah, Mr. President, I'd like to move O22-2, updating the Civil Emergency Powers Ordinance related to public health orders.
And you have a motion, Councilor Lewis. Is that a do pass?
I'm going to move a do pass.
Thank you. Is there a second? I see Councilor Bassan as a second. Again, Councilor Lewis, we always defer to the sponsor, and if you want to make a brief presentation, otherwise we have a list of public speakers that we can call upon and then get back to councilors for debate and discussion.
Mr. Chair, just a quick summary. If I could put this very simply, this ordinance repeals the decision that was made 2 years ago, giving the mayor the ability to make orders related to emergency public health orders. But what it does is give him the ability to make recommendations and advisories. And it still contemplates what the council was contemplating 2 years ago. And that was, this new challenge that we're having regarding, public health and the virus. And so it does still contemplate that we're going to have continue to have emergencies in this regard. And it gives the mayor the ability to make advisories, make recommendations in regard to those health orders, health emergencies, but not to be able to make orders in that regard. So it's pretty straightforward. We'll take some public comment if we have.
All right. Mr. Moya, are you with us?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Moya, I think we only have 2 people signed up for public comment. I think at least one of them here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you if you'll moderate our public comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, our first speaker will be Mr. Paul Gessing. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, sir, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. Strongly support efforts to restore more limited powers to elected officials, especially the mayor, as we move forward in this emergency and future emergencies. While not at the same level as the state, where we've had one person rule for the better part of 2 years, I think it's better to limit the power in an emergency, as we've seen here in the city of Albuquerque for this long. So I urge you to move this ordinance forward for full consideration in the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gessing. Mr. Chair, it was Susie Gao that had signed up for a comment on this item as well, but it looks like she has left the meeting, so that'll conclude public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Moya. I appreciate it. Councilors, we're back on the motion for a do pass on O2. Do we have councilor comments? I know I have one or two. If we don't have any others, then let me get us started and see. Oh, Councilor Bassan, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be remiss if I said if I didn't just say it like right now and out loud. I'm good with this. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Bassan. The shortest comment of the day, and it's appreciated. And let me just say, I initially sponsored and wrote the original amended Emergency Powers Act at the beginning of the pandemic. And what we found, for history's sake, is that if we remember that the city's old ordinance didn't address this. It did address things like riots, for example, civil disobedience and civil disturbances, but it didn't address the other public safety issues that as a city we deal with. And quite frankly, we found that some of the state's powers weren't specific enough here in the city of Albuquerque to allow us to have the flexibility. I have no issue with the way we wrote it, and I think it's different than the legislation at the state. Here in the city, we wrote this ordinance specifically to allow the city council to overturn the mayor. We can call an emergency meeting if we think the mayor's order is too prescriptive, too overburdensome, or if we simply want more information and wanted to extend that. We've had some very spirited discussions with the administration about different portions of it, but never have we gotten to a place where a majority of councilors felt that they needed to take action to step in and to rescind or modify or amend the mayor's orders. And I think that's the way this should work, is that the person whose job it is to watch the day-to-day business of the city should be able to make decisions that they think are in the best interest of our city. And I think the rest of us whose job it is to look out for everybody in the big picture have the right at any time to step in. I think that's a fair balance, and I think it works well, despite the fact that some folks may disagree with some of those provisions. I think we found the right balance that the state is still trying to strike, as far as I'm concerned. And I think this is an important thing for us to have here and going into the future. So I will not be supporting the repeal of this, and would vote against moving this forward with a do pass recommendation. Are there other discussions, either from the administration or other councilors, or I'll go back to Councilor Lewis to close? Seeing none, Councilor Lewis, we
Mr.
might
President,
go ahead, sir.
I mean, I do want to get another opportunity to the other councilors to weigh in if they'd like to. Honestly, I'd be interested in hearing where they're at on it right now.
Well, Councilor Bassan would like to make another comment, but no other councilors raised their hand. And so we're going to come back to you to close if she doesn't have anything to respond. Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to be a little more eloquent than this time, because I think that while the mayor has not done anything to me that has been egregious or worrisome, and that was something that came up in some of our earlier conversations when we were looking at whether or not we should pass this, I wasn't in support of it then. I think that while we've made it through a big chunk of COVID and the pandemic, I do think that several things should be relaxed a little bit. I thought that this was a little bit overreaching then. If I recall, I was pretty new, and I think I went pretty long and detailed as to why when that happened, but I still support moving us forward. And so again, while I think the mayor's done a good job and done his best and did not overstep in many ways, like some people were worried, I think it's time that we clear this up a little bit and start relaxing the potential for overreach if and when it could still happen. So again, I am still in support of this. I promise I won't talk again because now I lost the shortest comment of the day.
It's still
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilor Bassan.
All right, Councilor Lewis, hold on. We have Councilor Benton, and then we're going to let you close on the bill. Councilor Benton.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Just quickly, I guess I'm not sure who's there else is there in the conference room. Maybe Mr. Padilla. I mean, is there? I just wanted to see if there was any response from the administration on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilor Benton. Yeah, the administration, we supported this ordinance when it first went through, and we thought it was an important tool to have in the toolkit, especially addressing a pandemic, and we continue to support it. We did work with counselors. We wanted to be sure that they were comfortable with some of the policy, if some of the decisions that were made. We reached out, we did a lot of work with counselors, and so we are supportive of the legislation as it currently exists.
Of the emergency order as it currently exists, you mean?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Benton, correct, as the ordinance that currently exists.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, yeah, I've not seen any, again, I think we originally passed this in 2020 March, if I'm correct. And, you know, I voted for some of the amendments that amended the mayor's power at that time. But since then, I haven't really, I haven't seen any real problem, you know, with the way it's been administered by the mayor. And of course, to a great extent, we're following along with what the governor is doing. You know, I mean, a lot of folks don't necessarily agree with the timing of what she's doing, but I haven't seen any disaster occur from it. So I'd be in favor of keeping it in place this time.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Pena, you have the last word before we go back to Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if anyone, maybe Mr. Melendez from our staff. So mayor's emergency declaration is in effect for 30 days, right? So so every 30 days, we have an opportunity to either as a council say, hey, no more, we're done. So I just don't see it as a big deal. I don't think it's kind of related to the situation that people are saying is happening in Santa Fe. I think council still has the ability to kind of pull the plug, if you will, at any given time. So I think if that's correct, I will not be supporting this.
Mr. Chair, I think that was a question, and that is, I think, as you, Mr. Chair, referenced earlier, the way that the ordinance sets up since its inception was that once the orders is issued and the declaration made, that the council has an opportunity to offer a check on some of what's going on there.
Thank you, Mr. Melendez, for that clarification. Seeing no other comment, Councilor Lewis, we're back to you on close on the motion for a do pass. If the motion passes, this will go to full council. If it doesn't, we'll entertain a different motion on the floor.
Mr. Chair, just one comment. I'll amend the motion, but so a lot of the argument or comments, I mean, really are the point of this repeal, and that is that as far as we can understand, I mean, the mayor has not gone beyond what the state has done, what the governor's declarations have been, and so you could look at this and say, is it necessary if we've been in the midst of a pretty difficult pandemic and gone through this, and at the most what the city did was take the recommendation, or actually really as far as we went was what the governor has recommended during those times, and that's what I understand that it was. Then is there really a need for orders coming from the administration as opposed to advisories and recommendations? And so I think it's a matter of preference and looking at, hey, is this the right policy? Is this the best checks and balances? And best voice, that we want the mayor to have in that regard, and then with those checks and balances in place. And so that's what it is. But Mr. Chair, I'm going to change the motion to move into the full council, the next, full council without recommendation.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is now is no rec. Councilor Bassan, is that your second for no rec? Okay. So councilors, the motion on the floor is for no recommendation with a second. If there's no discussion on that motion going once, twice, I'll take the privilege of the chair to comment and say, I think I'd rather take Councilor Bassan's usual advice and say, I'd rather us dispose of, make a recommendation in committee and use our time wisely here. So I'll be voting against the no rec and hoping that, that we can have some other motions going forward. Seeing no other comment, Ms. Hinojos on the motion for no recommendation.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
No.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
No.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
So that bill will head to the city council on no recommendation. We now move on to agenda item R2. Councilor Lewis, this is yours as well.
Mr. President, I wanted to just a quick request to just switch the next agenda item with this one just for a moment, only because I need about a 30-second break.
No problem. We will we'll do that other one. It'll give you a lot more than 30 seconds by the time we get through the comments.
Well, I'll be a part of the discussion on this too. I just do.
All right, so don't let me forget to come back to that though. Go ahead, sir. Councilor Bassan, if you're ready, you have the next item, which is 03, relating to the plastic bag ban, which has a fancier, bigger name. But
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 03 is repealing enactment number 2019-008, Council Bill number 1948, which enacted Article 17, Chapter 13, ROA 1994, the Albuquerque Clean and Green Retail Ordinance, which limited the use of plastic single-use carryout bags, created a clean and green business program, and provided for administrative enforcement regulations. For the sake of knowing that this is going to end up in limbo forever otherwise, I would like to make a motion without recommendation.
I'm doing my math over here. Sorry about that. I see Councilor Pena has a second for the no rec.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I have one clarification before we talk with public comment and everyone else, if that's okay. In the staff write-up, it was a little bit, we had some back and forth today. So I just want to clarify that what was enacted in the original 1948 was not in reference to any styrofoam or plastic straw use. In the staff write-up, it was a little confusing in regards to that, but it has been clarified that that is not at all what this is discussing. This is discussing bags only. So if you need more clarification from staff, we can go that route, but just so that you know right off the gate.
That's a great clarification for what it's worth. I wish it would have styrofoam, but here we are. So
I was willing to concede on it, actually. I was going to compromise.
Well, if this fails, I look forward to writing that piece in the amendment with you. Mr. Moya, we're going to give the council a break for just a minute and put you on spotlight. Mr. Moya, I think we have about 25 people signed up for public comment today. I know maybe all of them are not here with us, but I'm going to let you go through these. But I also see we have a number of people who signed up using the same email or phone number, but different names. And that usually means there's a family there. So I'll defer to you, Mr. Moya, if we have multiple speakers using the same connection, if we could limit their individual time, but let them go in series together so we don't bounce back and forth if that's possible.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So our first speaker will be Catherine Gonzalez. Catherine, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Gonzalez. I'm an Albuquerque educator, a mother, and a concerned citizen. And I speak before you today in strong opposition to O-22-3. A repeal of the Clean and Green Ordinance is unnecessary, unconscionable, and incredibly short-sighted. Sadly, we no longer have the luxury of considering what is convenient in the short term. Our water and air are already polluted with microplastics, and our children already bear the burden of our selfish, short-sighted choices. That you would even consider taking a step in the wrong direction horrifies me. The Albuquerque Clean and Green Ordinance not only removed plastics from our local waste stream, but it also sent a clear message to our community's youth. We care about the world we are leaving you, and we are making the best choices we can to help ensure you have water and air to pass on to your own children. Standing on the side of good might not always be the easiest thing, but it's the right thing. Do not regress. We don't have time. We don't have the luxury of taking steps back. We can't. We just don't. Be proud of the choices you tell your grandchildren that you made. And I really don't think this needs to go out of committee. It's crazy to me that it's even being considered. We really do not have the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next speaker is Ashley McKenna. Ashley, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you, members of the committee, Councilor Chairman Davis. I agree with Ms. Gonzalez. As an educator and a public school employee, we worked so hard. Hours of our time that we came together to support this bill to be put to committee without any clear information from the impact study. I have 2 points to make tonight. Plastic bags are not recyclable. We hosted an informational film at the Guild for the public during this original push to ban plastic bags, and it ends with children in India burning plastic bags around a bonfire. That is where your plastic bags are recycled. I have had numerous meetings with solid waste to talk about how plastic bags affect our recycling, and they do not become recycled. Secondly, microplastics are poisoning us. It doesn't matter what area you live in Albuquerque or this world, we are all eating a credit card of plastic a week. We are all destined to have cancerous materials in our bodies. And I do feel very upset. After we passed this original ban, I buried my niece of a midline glioblastoma. 13 years old in 6 months, she had no chance. And I do feel emotional because Ms. Gonzalez is right. We cannot go back if you have children or you care at all. We cannot put plastics in our environment. Plastic bags are not recyclable. They break down and go straight to our river and our soil. If you want to recycle plastic water bottles, that's great. That's not what we're here to talk about today. This cannot go backwards. That's all I have to say. And we will be here at every meeting to defend it.
Thank you, Ashley. Our next speaker is Annie Hanna. Annie, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
There's a whole bunch of Hanas I saw.
Yes, we're all here. Dear members of the Finance Committee, my name is Ani Hanna. I'm a mom and I'm with New Mexico Climate Justice. And today I'd like to read a letter to you on behalf of 26 local organizations, community groups, and local businesses who all signed on very short notice this week to say, please do not repeal. So I'm going to read that and read the organizations. Dear members of the City Council, we are calling on the City Council to uphold the Clean and Green Ordinance in Albuquerque. This ordinance was only reinstated in August 21, and thick plastic bag loophole was recently fixed in November, so that's just 4 months ago. The Solid Waste Department is currently conducting a study of the ordinance to calculate the amount of plastic removed from the waste stream, which will be completed this summer. We recommend keeping Clean and Green instated so the study can be conducted and properly, comprehensively looked at. According to Solid Waste, there has been no indication that Clean and Green has been a problem for local businesses, and Solid Waste also continues to do their free giveaways of bags. Reusable bags are available in stores. They're usually about 99 cents and can be used thousands of times. Councillor Bassan's statements that reusable bags are a financial burden is unfounded and misleading. Secondly, Councillor Bassan's ordinance states reusable bags would be unsanitary, but research shows that COVID is rarely spat on surfaces and reusable bags can easily be sanitized and washed after using. Keeping single-use plastic bags out of our waste stream helps keep our landscapes clean and prevents microplastics from contaminating the Rio Grande, our bosque ecosystem, the wildlife, and soils. It is a small but crucial step towards tackling plastic pollution. And last, this is a really important point to me, is plastic production pollution is also a racial justice issue.
Thank you, Annie. Your 2 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I believe Alex Hanna is there with you, so we can move on to Alex.
Okay.
And Alex, your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hi, I'm Alex. Keep the plastic bag ban because isn't it nice to see everybody bringing their reusable bags to the store? Isn't it nice to see our cactuses clean without plastic bags getting caught in them? Isn't it nice to see the bosque without any plastic? When I was 9 years old, I started speaking out against plastic bags, and here I am at age 13 doing the same thing. I've spoken at 6 city council meetings and have had support from hundreds of people in Albuquerque who have said enough to single-use plastic. Because of the pandemic, this plastic bag ban finally went into effect in August 2021 and got fixed 4 months ago in November to truly take plastic bags out of stores. We need time for people in stores to get used to bringing their reusable bags. Let's not take away the gains that we already have made. Let's do more to protect our habitats and waterways. Let's move forward, New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Athena Hanna. Your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hi, my name is Athena and I'm 11 years old. I remember when my brother said at the signing of the plastic bag ban, a walk of 1,000 miles starts with one step, and we just took it. This was on 2019 Earth Day in Albuquerque. Do we really want to go back, start all over again, not taking a single step forward to a clean and safe environment to the finish line? I've gone to city council meeting upon city council meetings, hundreds of people watching me, my knees locked, nervous, but we went back again and again. We just got the thick plastic bag loophole fix in November. Do you want to crush the dream of making our earth better? Crush our hearts on Valentine's Day? Do you want your children and grandchildren to be proud that you helped stop plastic pollution? Say yes to keeping the plastic bag ban. Say yes to a clean Rio Grande. Say yes to a clean environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena. Our next speaker will be Adrian Hanna. Adrian, your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hi, I'm Adrian. Plastic releases toxins into the land. I don't want to find plastic bags blowing around Albuquerque, floating down the Rio Grande and stuck in cactuses. How hard is it to bring a reusable bag to the store? How hard is it to think of the future generations? I calculated that if we repeal the plastic bag ban, Albuquerque will use 205 million plastic bags a year. I was recently a part of a project to pick up plastic litter, and I found microplastic mixed deep in the soil. This land will take years to heal. Your choices affect our future. Please vote with the next generation in your mind.
Thank you, Adrian. And our next speaker is Ariana Hanna. And your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hi, my name is Ariana. I'm 8 years old. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I love to play tennis. Did you know that every week you eat around 5 grams of plastic? That's the weight of a credit card. I help my mom shop and I bring their reusable bags. Every time we go shopping, we bring them. Then we clean them, then put them back in the car. I've done this for many, many years, and it's really easy. I encourage you to do the same thing. Please keep the plastic bag ban. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Our next speaker is Carol Chamberlain. Carol, please feel free to turn. Oh, sorry about that, Carol. Go ahead and unmute yourself again. And your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hi, hello, City Council members. My name's Carol Chamberlain. I'm a member of the local Sierra Club chapter's executive committee. And so it may look like I'm sitting here by myself tonight, but in fact, I have thousands of Sierra Club members sitting here with me. Plastic pollution is a global problem. It's a man-made problem. We created this mess, and every citizen, every community has a responsibility and an obligation to do its part to reduce the pollution we continue to generate. Brilliant minds are working on the cleanup problem, but the plastics industry continues to crank out 5 trillion bags per year. This is enough bags to encircle the entire globe 7 times. That's every year. Every minute, nearly 2 million plastic bags are used around the world. And statistics show that the average bag is used about 12 minutes before it's tossed out. Now, scientists have calculated that that plastic bag is going to take 1,000 years to fully degrade. You know what that means? Every bit of plastic that has been created is still with us. This is a huge problem, and we're just, trying to solve it. Banning plastic bags is one simple way to start. Don't be swayed by specious arguments about it's hard or it's expensive. It's not, it's easy. We urge you to stay the course. Trust Albuquerque citizens to do the right thing. We've got this. I urge you to vote no on this proposal.
Thank you, Carol. Our next speaker is Sarah Pierpont. Sarah, please feel free to turn your video. I see you're there ready to go. Your 2 minutes will begin once you start speaking.
Hello, councilors. My name is Sarah Pierpont. I'm the executive director of New Mexico Recycling Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit that's been working throughout New Mexico for over 20 years to help residents improve their recycling and also waste reduction. We recently helped the city of Las Cruces enact a single-use plastic bag ban that went into effect on January 1st. It has a lot of support from the businesses and the residents, and it's off to a great start. I'm happy to share the details of that program with you as well. In just a month and a half, Las Cruces residents and staff of the city have noticed a noticeable decrease in the single-use plastic bag litter in their community. And the reasons to support a bag ban and to not repeal Clean and Green are twofold. There's litter, and they're not recyclable. So litter, according to a 2020 annual report from Keep America Beautiful, they do a litter survey every year across the country, and 325 million single-use plastic bags were found along America's roadways and waterways, and 95% of those were the single-use plastic bags that we consider in this ban. They weren't the hefty trash bags you'd use for your garbage. Secondly, these bags are not recyclable. There is not a system where they can be put in your blue bin and recycled. They get stuck in the equipment, and they're the #1 contaminant across the country for recycling programs. A city the size of Albuquerque can estimate that they have about $200,000 in down productivity at the recycling facility, the Freeman Recycling Facility for Albuquerque, by having to turn off equipment and clean these bags out of the equipment. Secondly, a lot of these bags are taken to big box stores to be recycled. And that's because they might have a large volume of trains across the country, and they're only having one thing come back, those single-use plastic bags. There's no contamination. However, there's no knowing if those bags are really recycled when they are taken back to the Walmarts and the Best Buys. We have no idea what really happens to them. And we do know that less than 1% of the tens of billions of plastic bags used in the United States each year are recycled. So while we are the Recycling Coalition, this is not an instance where recycling is the answer. This is important to remember the whole waste management hierarchy, where reduce and reuse trump recycling. This ordinance.
Thank you, Sarah. Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lorene Zuner. Lorene, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when she starts speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Laureen Zunner, and I live here in Albuquerque. And I'm going to reiterate the letter that I sent to you all yesterday. Councillor Bassan wants to repeal the single-use plastic bag ban codified in the Clean and Green Retail Ordinance. Her reasons are that the alternatives are not clean, leading to health risks, and not green because they lead to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and thus to more global warming. I take issue with these claims. First, bacteria can just as easily be transferred to food items from shopping carts and hand baskets and then to checkout counters as from reusable bags. The chance of this happening with reusable bags is practically zero if they are properly washed after use. More can easily be done to encourage this. Second, the environmental impacts of paper and reusable bags are much lower than single-use plastic bags because they are recyclable and/or reusable. According to a British study, a paper bag only has to be used 3 times to be comparable to a single-use plastic bag, and it's recyclable or compostable. I have been using and washing some of my cloth bags for decades, easily outperforming single-use plastic bags. Third, I see lots of people bringing their own bags to stores that charge for new bags or offer rebates to people bringing their own. The more people bringing their own bags, the lower the cost to them and the stores. It is also very easy to make reusable bags out of old t-shirts. YouTube is full of how-to videos. Fourth, single-use plastic bags very easily become litter. Besides it being an eyesore, they could potentially become a serious health hazard as they break down into microplastics.
Thank you, Laureen. Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Winifred Whiteman Jennings. Winifred, please feel free to turn your video on. There you go. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you, everyone, counselors. So many of you have said such wonderful things, and it's really hard to follow the Hannah family. There are so many good reasons why we need to keep this ban in place. It is a huge victory for Albuquerque that we have banned plastic bags when so many cities across the country are still dealing with this pollution. We need to do a lot more. We need to keep going. There are microplastics in the wilderness areas and national parks. Antarctic ice and Arctic snow have microplastics in them. They're found in microorganisms all the way at the bottom of the ocean. There is nowhere on Earth that is free of microplastics. And plastic bags, because they do degrade, but they just turn into little microplastics that spread all over the world. We're all eating plastic all of the time. Everyone in the world is working on this problem. India, how do you feel about comparing us to the nation of India? They banned single-use plastic this year. So plastic bags, straws, utensils, those are all completely banned in India right now. And we want to go back behind where India is. I also want to reflect on the fact that bringing your own bags is not a burden. A lot of our grocery chains actually have been doing alternatives to plastic bags for a long time, such as Costco and Natural Grocers, where they have boxes that they got stuff in, and you can take one if you need something to carry your stuff out if you forgot to bring a bag with you. And there's no reason why everybody can't do that. We also, I think, can look at the plastic bag ban as an opportunity for entrepreneurship. I brought, this is a shopping bag that I made myself out of recycled denim, and I used to sell these when I was a stay-at-home mom, just to help feed my kids. And this is the kind of thing that we can do instead of plastic bags. We have so many opportunities. I honestly find it astonishing that we're here.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Zulevi. Rachel, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when she starts speaking.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members of the committee. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak against this short-sighted and premature and irresponsible proposal to repeal the plastic bag ban in Albuquerque. As a member of this community, as a mother, a lover of our natural spaces and precious wildlife habits, as a shopper and a consumer, and as a breather here in Albuquerque, I ask you to reject this proposal. My family and I hike and walk in Albuquerque's natural and open spaces frequently, and it is our regular habit to collect trash on our walks. For those early weeks that the bag ban was in place, there were significantly fewer bags stuck in the trees along the bosque, fewer bags drifting around the foothills. When the plastic bag ban was suspended as part of the response to the pandemic, it did not take long at all for the bags to show back up in these natural spaces. Beyond creating unsightly litter and obvious physical hazards for wildlife, why should we care about this? As mentioned by earlier speakers, one seriously alarming reason is the prevalence of microplastics in our community. A 2019 USGS report on microplastics in the Rocky Mountains said plastics were identified in more than 90% of the samples collected in the Colorado Front Range. The plastic materials were mostly fibers that were only visible with magnification. The report's conclusion literally stated that it is raining plastic in the Rocky Mountains and surrounding areas. And while we may feel disconnected from plastic ocean pollution, researchers in Germany are warning us that the impact of microplastic in soils and freshwater could have long-term negative effects on terrestrial wildlife ecosystems. And in 2020, the first ever study to explore how the presence of microplastics can affect soil fauna was published. These scientists called for a reduction in the use of plastics and to avoid burying plastic wastes in soils because this may, quote, bring adverse ecological consequences on soil. Where do you think the plastic bags floating around in our community and environment end up, if not in our soil? As an agricultural community, we should care about this very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jennifer Patterson. Jennifer, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking. Jennifer, you are still muted there.
Are you trying to get Jennifer or Diane?
No, Jennifer, it looks like your audio is, or your microphone may not be working, Jennifer, because you are unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to you. Our next speaker will be Teresa Palmer. Teresa, please feel free to turn your video on, and your time will begin when she starts speaking.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I wrote my comments in, but my daughter Emily is going to speak.
Hello, my name is Emily Christopher. I am 12 years old and co-founder of the Public Academy for Performing Arts Environmental Club. I believe we need to keep our plastic ban because plastic bags are bad for the environment. They are not decomposable and can't be recycled. It frustrates me when I see them floating around the city because I know that they will break down into microplastics that can get into animals, the soil, and us. Please keep the plastic ban so that we can reduce the amount of plastic in our bodies, our city, for my generation to clean up. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Ralph Bronze. Ralph, please feel free to turn your video on, and your time will begin when she starts speaking.
Chair Davis, members of the Finance and Government Operations Committee. My name is Ralph Bronze, 30-plus year resident of City Council District 7 and also representing today the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. As an individual, I testified in support of the original ordinance 3 years ago amid an outpouring of support from members of the community, including a multitude of children who at that time made the best case for this ordinance. I was pleased to see the ban was finally restored 6 months ago, and then a couple of months later, the administration had removed the loophole on retailers being able to use thicker mill plastic bags as reusable. That's still plastic bag waste. Regrettably, a low percentage of these single-use bags make it to the landfill tomb. I think all of us see daily the fugitive waste of plastic bags in our metro area. We see the bags in our arroyo system, at storm drain inlets, in the bosque, and underneath the bridges. We really need to be mindful of the breakdown of thousands of these bags. Actually, I probably have to ask one of the Hannah children to give me the actual numbers of these, but breakdown of thousands of these bags into micro pieces of plastic pollution in the drainages to the Rio Grande and in the Rio Grande and adjacent acequias. I would like to repeat the other express request that we need to see this through until the study can be completed in late spring, early summer, if there has been a decrease in the plastic bag waste seen around the city before any repeal of this ban would be heard by the full council. Now is not the time to send confusing messages to the public and to the retailers, and most importantly, to not disappoint the children who realize this ordinance was a positive measure for their future. Thank you, councilors, for your consideration.
Thank you, Ralph. Our next speaker is Nancy Singham. Nancy, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Hi, thank you, Chair, committee members. My name is Nancy Singham. I'm a retired APS kindergarten teacher, a resident of District 6, and also a member of 350 New Mexico. I want to oppose the motion to repeal and focus on the climate impact. I guess the place to start with that would be the IPCC. The world's top climate scientists tell us that to avoid catastrophic global temperatures beyond 2 degrees Celsius, the world has to cut carbon emissions by at least half by 2030. This is a really crucial window. If we don't meet this goal, we may not be able to stop tipping points that take us into a free fall of global warming. Do plastics contribute to fossil fuel emissions? Emphatically, yes. Plastics are carbon intensive contributors to climate change at every step along the way, from the fossil fuel extraction, transportation, the refining, the manufacture, and they also contribute to greenhouse gases emissions after they're used, particularly when incinerated, which many are, contributing to greenhouse gases. And of course, very few are recycled. If the fossil fuel plastics industry is allowed to expand as projected, they will create more plastics in the next 25 years than have been produced in the history of the world so far. But given their contributions to greenhouse gases, and since 40% of plastics created are used only as single-use packaging, shrinking the use of these single-use plastics is clearly the place to start toward our reduction of greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Our next speaker is Jeff Smith. Jeff, please feel free to turn your video on, and your time will begin once you start speaking.
Thank you for your time today. I urge you to vote no on proposal 0223 to repeal the Albuquerque Clean and Green Retail Ordinance. Carrying a few reusable cloth shopping bags into the store is not an inconvenience. Reusable bags are available at many stores for a nominal fee or even free. Our streets and fields are cleaner without plastic bags blowing in the wind, catching on cactus, trees, fences, and injuring wildlife. Plastic production also harms human health due to toxic pollution from materials manufacturing. As the Hannah family said, let's help keep Albuquerque clean and green. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next speaker is Diane Reese. Diane, please feel free to turn your video back on, and your time will begin once you start speaking.
Good afternoon. Thank you, city councilors. I'd like to start off, sorry, I'm not very visible there. Like to start off by telling you I'm the chair of the central group of the Sierra Club, and along with Carol and a couple of other people, there are thousands of us who are members of the Sierra Club, and we are a strong group who listens and come out and vote and help you with your tough decisions. So thank you so much for your hard work. I appreciate it, especially passing that clean and green ordinance last 2 years ago. Such a simple thing that we can do. And I want to testify personally. I walk every day in the bosque or on the ditches. I will testify since this ordinance started. And once it was reenacted, I have seen fewer bags floating around, not just in the cactuses, which are mentioned so often, but everywhere around the city. So thank you for that. And please vote no on this proposal. I've watched in the news as campaigns such as this have popped up in other communities that have banned bags. And sadly, as I've clicked into links, and thank you, Councilor Bassan, you provided us some information on how you made your decision to put this forward. As I clicked into those links, I was taken to the plastic bag industry. And it's not surprising this is a threat to their business, that they would stand up and do research and provide information that naturally would encourage us not to ban their products. It's not that simple. But we're strong people in Albuquerque. We want to be to honor this beautiful state of ours. And I ask you to stay the course, vote no. I will note, businesses are charging for paper bags now, 10 cents here, 10 cents there. So they're making some money that's income that they didn't have before. So there's a positive on the economic aspect of it.
Thank you, Diane. Your 2 minutes are up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Paul Gessing. Paul, please feel free to turn your video back on, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Council Finance Committee. Thank you for the time tonight. Councilor Bassan, I appreciate your leadership on this, and I'll be the one person so far to defend and applaud what you're doing here. There's a number of reasons for that. I am the parent of 3 children, and I shop for those kids, and it does require a lot of effort to bring groceries and food items out to the vehicle, and plastic bags make our lives more convenient. I also remember when I was a kid, it was reduce, reuse, and recycle. Those plastic bags are very thin and very effective at doing what they do, which is carrying the groceries. Those big canvas bags and other forms of so-called reusable bags use a lot more energy and material than a very thin plastic bag does. And I reuse those bags for trash can liners. I reuse them for my pets. And that is actually superior to recycling. Third, according to our World in Data website, North America as a whole produces 0.9% of the global mismanaged plastic. That's plastic that's not recycled or becomes pollution. So the problem is not here in New Mexico. It's not here in the United States or even North America. So I don't think this is very effective policy. And finally, if the council does care about improving our cityscape, I would encourage them to do something about the homeless population, which winds up polluting street corners all over our city, leaving trash out for all to see. And the problem of masks, which have now been proven after 2 years to be ineffective at stopping the spread of COVID-19. And yet that plastic winds up rampant throughout our ecosystem. Nobody mentions that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is Ellen DeWicki. Ellen, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Sorry about that. I need some time to recover from that last comment. But okay, I'm a citizen of Albuquerque, and I'm an environmentalist and a conservationist. And I just fear that Albuquerque is becoming a city that no one's going to want to live in or visit. We're just moving backwards with all the crime and the lawlessness on the streets and the homelessness. And one thing that we have going for us is that we are environmentalists. I thought when we passed this ordinance, it kind of was a sign that, hey, we care about our future. We care about our standard of living. We're a progressive city, but now we're taking it back this one tiny little step that we took. Plastic doesn't go away. It's just keeps piling up, and single-use plastic is so abundant, it is the worst offender. I used to often see a dozen bags go out of the grocery store in one cart. So many that just imagine in a day, a week, a month, what actually will be used. It hurts to think about it because there's so much. All this plastic that's used for just a few minutes will last forever in our landfill or maybe in a plastic island in the Pacific. We have to stop producing all this plastic, and production will stop if there is no demand. It is an incredibly irresponsible thing to do if we care about this beautiful planet we have been blessed with. The ordinance was one of very few that didn't cost the taxpayers a cent. Any cost to individuals is very minimal and is certainly our obligation as responsible members of our community for the common good. If there are people who really can't afford to buy reusable bags or can't afford to wash them, surely the city can afford to provide the few dollars they need for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Our next speaker will be Jennifer Patterson. See if your connection is a little bit better. Please proceed. Yes, we can. Great. Your 2 minutes will start once you begin speaking.
Thank you, members of the committee. 3 years ago, I was here speaking about the Clean and Green Ordinance and why it's necessary for our community's health and sustainability. I'm deeply disappointed that I must be back here to talk about it again, but now with even more knowledge. I'm currently pursuing degrees in environmental science and political science, minoring in economics from the University of New Mexico, and I'm happy to share my research on plastic. I recognize banning single-use plastic bags isn't going to solve our sustainability problem. Single-use paper bags still create a negative impact on Earth, just not as bad of one. Ideally, we would solely use reusable bags, but a ban on single-use plastic bags is a step in the right direction and more plausible. One of the main differences between paper and plastic bags is biodegradability. Paper bags take about 2 weeks to 1 month to biodegrade without polluting the environment because they're made of cellulose. Plastic bags take 10 years, and it gets worse. Plastic bags don't truly biodegrade, but rather break down into tiny microplastics that contaminate our air, water, and soil. Microplastics cause damage to human cells in the laboratory. Cell death, allergic response, and damage to cell walls were caused by the level of microplastics that people ingest. And on average, people consume a credit card of plastic per week. Not to mention, it estimated that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050. Again, paper bags aren't perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, and there's no room for us to move backwards given the state of climate emergency. This ordinance has not been in place for us to truly see the effects. We had temporarily repealed it due to public health during the peak of the pandemic, which is quite understandable. But since then, the CDC has published that the chance of COVID-19 surface transmission is less than 1 in 10,000. And there's no practical reason to repeal this ordinance forever. Retailers all across the country and close to home in Santa Fe are banned from giving out single-use plastic bags at point of sale. This type of ordinance has been recognized by other cities as important. And I would like
Thank you, Jennifer. Your time is up. Thank you. Our next speaker is Nora Warren. Nora, please feel free to turn your video back on, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Hello, council members. My name is Nora, and I would like to start off by saying that the plastic bag ban has only been around since August, and there has been barely any time to adjust. Of course, there are going to be a few hiccups in the beginning. There always are. But this is something I have spent a lot of time fighting for, and I'm not going to allow that to go to waste. Now I would like to address some of the points made against the plastic bag ban. Starting off with the argument about the costs of reusable bags. I am a member of a low-income household. My father, who is retired, and I use food stamps and require Section 8 housing in order to afford our apartment. We have purchased multiple reusable bags and would gladly purchase more because it has not caused us any financial burden. Secondly, regarding the statement made about the health risks of reusable bags, it is a valid statement, but the issue at hand is rare. According to a study conducted by the University of Arizona, 51% of reusable bags carry coliform bacteria, which may sound scary, but according to the Washington State Department of Health, coliform bacteria is commonly found in our environment and will not likely cause illness, as well as a statement from Penn State saying that most types of coliform bacteria are harmless to humans. Our planet is dying, and I am tired of sitting back and letting adults and members of the government control my future. Microplastics and plastic bags will be found for thousands of years and not only harm the environment, but humans as well. It is selfish to allow the citizens of Albuquerque to use plastic bags. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Mr. Chair, that'll conclude public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Moya. Thank you for working through those, and thanks to everybody for being patient with each other through that process. Councilors, we are back on 03, which is currently on a motion on a due pass from Councilor Bassan. Nope, it's no rec. Sorry. Yeah, she's fixing me. No rec. Perfect. Councilors, questions, comments, discussion on the motion? Councilor Bassan to get us started.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I have some comments based off of what people were saying to get us kind of started on the roll with that. And then I'll try to keep it brief, but no promises this time. So they're not in any particular order because I'm writing all over my page, but I would like to point out that the studies that whether you're on one side or the other or somewhere in between, if people look for the right thing, they're going to find it. It's making sure that we use the right sources. So I'm sure people are going to say I didn't use the right sources when I was researching, and I'm sure I would say the same thing. So that's where it's important for everyone to have their own guidance and research and opinion in the matter. So on that note, it's not just coliform, because I agree that coliform is nearly everywhere and it's not such a threat, but fecal coliform. That is a threat. And that is what I was talking about in the response email. And I'm concerned about that when I talk about part of the problem with hygiene on these bags, in addition to the fact that, yes, some people wash them, which I actually applaud them for doing that. I think that that's the whole point. You have to wash these reusable bags in 140-degree heat with soap after every single use for there not to be an extension and a growth of bacteria and viruses. So if people aren't doing that after each use, which most people that I talk to either have hardly ever washed their bags or rarely wash their bags, that's part of the problem. It's the exception that people are washing them rather than the rule. Homelessness and crime. That's like a common theme. Yes, we just had 20 some people talk to us about bags. And I understand, again, the argument can be that, why am I bringing this up now when we've already passed it? And there's a whole bunch of conversation that's happened years ago. But we had no one talk to us about homelessness and crime hardly. That's amazing to me that this is where the priorities are in the city. I'm saying we need to have choice. I'm saying that for the sake of hygiene with the homeless people, if they need a bag, if they need something to keep clean, if they need something, they're not washing their bags after every use. So when we talk about some of the priorities that the city has, I think that's really key in bringing this into a full spectrum vision. So I don't think that this has also ever been about a burden on people. I didn't reintroduce this and introduce this repeal because I think it's a burden. I think that, again, it's about choice. So you have people on one side of the spectrum that would like to use reusable bags with stitches that are not always recyclable because they're made of more than one material. So I hope people are hanging on to them because you can't recycle them if that's the case. Plastic bags are recyclable. They're not recyclable when they're in the blue bin that we put out on the street because we don't have the capabilities. So for those people that are recycling them in there, I can understand that that's a problem. If you take them back to a proper recycling location at most grocery stores, when we had these, they can be recycled along with your bread bags, along with the air bubbles from shipments, along with tortilla bags, along with dry cleaning bags. So we can really, really use link elbows together and recycle where we can. I think it's also important to note that in this legislation, we're prioritizing saying that the city will ensure cleanup. We will figure out a way to go and do more litter control. Although I think that in the last 2 years, some of the argument for why there hasn't been so much plastic might be because of the Clean and Green Ordinance, or it might be because we were homebound. So, I mean, there's an argument for both sides of this. And I think it's really important to recognize that, people are going out and buying plastic bags anyway. So if they can't get them at the store with their groceries or something a little more convenient, I've talked to many people that are going out and actually going to the Dollar Tree to get plastic bags to line their trash can without actually reusing them ever. So we're still manufacturing plastic. Yeah, it would be great if we could stop doing all of the things that are bad. If we could all figure out a way to get solar energy to where it wasn't a problem on the manufacturing side. And if we could figure out a way that on the decomposition side of something, we have to find balance. And that's what I'm looking for. People should have the right to choose whether they want plastic bags, paper bags, reusable bags. And so one last thing before we entertain all the other counselors on this, but I am aware that the administration did send out an email asking for the public of a certain variety to go ahead and reach out for public comment. And I would like to respectfully request that the administration forward me their email list so that I may have the opportunity to properly respond to these constituents, please.
Thank you, Councilor Bassan. Councilors, other questions or comments? Going once, going twice. Councilor Benton, do I see you there? Or if not, I'll move. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. Ultimately, this comes down to money, right? It's cheap to buy a plastic bag. It's cheaper for the much cheaper, of course, for the retailers to use this. And at the time we debated this, we were talked out of, some people were talked out of including the food service industry in it. There's just so much plastic out there. There's so much disposable plastic. There's so much degrading plastic out there. This is making a small dent in it. But yeah, it costs more to buy a paper bag. It's more, I guess it's more, whatever you say, you're washing more in your washing machine if you're washing these recyclable bags. But there's an ultimate cost that's not being paid. So this free cheap bag, whatever the containers as well. I mean, I was in favor of banning the foam containers and so forth as well. Yeah, it reduces the cost of doing business, but what's the true cost? What's the true cost of all the extractive industries that's required primarily, petroleum to make these plastic bags? And it's already been repeated plenty, but the degradability of them compared to the paper bags, which really honestly not that many. A lot of stores are just not offering a bag, and that's a culture change that can occur if you make a simple ordinance like this. And I think people were getting on board with that certainly before they were temporarily banned due to the pandemic. There's a place where Councilor Lewis, I do think we were off on that one. I think we should have kept that was not a necessary emergency measure. But now we're back to allowing recyclable bags and hallelujahs. But yeah, it's pretty tough to listen to all these arguments all over again, and we're going to hear them all over again on both sides. But I'll be opposing this, and I don't think it should see the light of day at council.
Thank you, Councilor Ben. And I'll go for the shortest comment and say I agree. I think it was a good idea when we did it. I think we're leading our peers around the country, and I think that we ought to give it a chance to succeed before we try to repeal it. And I did hear those folks saying that we got to have some certainty in this, whether we all agree or don't. At some point, we have to quit bouncing back and forth. We've got to make this decision move forward, and we do have other more pressing things to deal with. But if it needs to be said, it needs to be done. I have no objection to us reiterating our support for this, and I believe that means I wouldn't support the motion for no rec tonight. I'd rather keep it here in committee or to a do not pass. And so I don't believe I'll be voting for the no rec. Councilor Lewis, then Councilor Pena, and then we'll be back to Councilor Bassan to close. And then we'll go to our other matter that was held over from Councilor Lewis. Councilor Lewis.
Chair, thank you. I do support the bill and I support the motion for a no rec. It's pretty simple, straightforward. And I think one point is, I mean, all these things sound like, and you've been talking about the tax, but these all sound like just minuscule, small, money and costs that we're passing along to people in our city, but they add up. And these are the kind of costs to people in our city that really can't afford it. That can't afford it the most. I mean, I'm fortunate. Most of us here in this committee are fortunate enough to be able to have the money to be able to spend the extra costs on these kinds of ordinances and resolutions, but there are people in our city that just don't. And so it affects them more than it affects anybody else. And so for a lot of reasons, I support the bill, I support the repeal, and I support the motion.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Councilor Bassan. I know, putting something like this forward is always a difficult decision, but I really appreciate all the work she's put into and really looking and researching and really taking the time to find out if this is something that's even reasonable to do it, to repeal it. And, and having the discussions with Councilor Bassan, it's very interesting is because a lot of lots has happened since the pandemic has started, right? And it's brought attention to a lot of things, and germs is number one, right? And so when we're looking at this, and I'm hoping as we kick this can down the road and looking for how can we be better stewards of how we ensure that we recycle, whether this moves forward or whether it doesn't. One of the things that I was a proponent of coming on early on is that when we talked about these plastic bags, as there's so many sides to all these stories. People who are disabled actually rely on these bags when they go to the grocery store. They relied on plastic bags in order to be able to transport some of their items. And it was kind of ironic when I was driving this past weekend, there was a man, he wasn't disabled, but he had gotten off the bus and he was carrying two big paper bags with his groceries, and one of them tore. And I just really felt so bad for him. He was on the sidewalk picking up his items. So what I did was I actually talked to the administration about the heavier weight plastic bags, and the heavier weight plastic bags, I was told can be recycled. I later found out that we actually don't recycle them either, right? So that's it's a heavier weight plastic that right now it's on our ordinance that we could use, that I'm not so fond of anymore, just because of the fact that if we're not recycling the thin bags or the larger bags, then we really have to, as a city, ensure that we have those practices in place or find some means in order to be able to recycle either or. Talk to a lot of people about this because I did support the legislation initially. I'm not sure where I'm at now, but supported the legislation initially. But talking to a lot of folks, talking to a lot of cashiers, they're very leery about the bags. I talked to them just recently. They're very leery about the bags coming in. They're not sure whether people are washing them. They're telling me that people are coming in with dirty bags, so we really don't want to put people in that kind of predicament either. So, I just look forward to the discussions moving forward of how we make sure whatever direction that we go, that we make sure that we're doing the right thing. I know, Counselor, it was just stated that that this is a cost thing. I don't think it's a cost thing. When you look at what it costs to transport the same amount of paper bags, it takes 7 semis to transport the same amount of paper bags when it takes one truckload to transport the same amount of plastic. Anyway, so I don't want to do any legislation that's going to be just for the sake of doing legislation. We have to make sure that we do what's right by the community. And as you all know, I've just really had concerns. I've always wanted us to have our own, at the city of Albuquerque, our own materials recycling facility, so that we do have a say on what we recycle and what we don't recycle. I'm very concerned of even some of the amount of items that are going to the MRF currently that are actually, we're picking them up, transporting them. That's a lot of cost, transporting them to the MRF. Then whatever they don't accept or recycle, then we're actually picking it up again and taking it to the landfill. So we really have a long ways to go as a city in terms of making sure. So I just want to, people who were on this, and yes, I did receive an email that the administration sent an email out, and I think that that's a little, it's not necessarily, I guess they can do whatever they want to do, but when you call out a certain number of people, when there's a lot of people, including these cashiers that I've been talking about, including the man who was picking up his groceries from the floor, including people who are actually seeing the impacts of this. I was at a store not too long ago where the lady was refusing to take this woman's bag. She said, "I'm just going to give you a plastic bag." She says, I'll pay the fee. She says, "But I do not want to take your recycle bag back." She says, I just don't feel safe about it. And it was weird to be in the line when experiencing that. But I can see where that cashier, if that young lady was my daughter, I probably wouldn't want for her safety either to take that bag back. So with that, I support Councillor Bassan's no rec.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, councilors, for weighing in. Seeing no other comment, we'll go to Councillor Bassan to close on the motion for a no recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say a couple more things in response to all that. And then, one thing that got brought up is, washing bags versus not washing bags. One could argue water waste, and we live in a desert. I disagree completely that this is only about money. That's not what it's about. This is about safety. This is about options. This is about structure to allow people to do what they think is best for them. It goes so far as now, what about mask litter? If we're going to start talking about litter, they decompose, but we have these problems. We have to work them out, and we have to find the best middle ground to do it while making Albuquerque as successful as possible. So we're in a pandemic. We're still there, even though I hope we're coming out of it. But at the same time, I think that's part of why this is what started my thought process. For those people that want to know where I got research and where you can recycle these plastic bags, you can go to bagandfilmrecycling.org so that you can see that plastic bags are recyclable, just not at our facility here in Albuquerque. Fossil fuels are used to transport, like Councilor Pena said. In addition to ethylene is used, which must be removed from natural gas. And so we can either allow it to go to waste, or we can use it to make some plastic that could be used in the long run to help out with some of these other remedial problems that we have as far as keeping us safe from germs and all of the aforementioned. So we can keep going in circles, but I would still urge your support for a without recommendation from committee.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Councilors, the motion on the floor is a no recommendation from this committee, and I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilor Bassan.
Yes.
Councilor Benton.
No.
Councilor Lewis. Councilor Lewis.
Sorry, it's a yes.
Thank you. Councilor Pena.
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
No.
It passes on a 3-2 vote.
Councilors, that matter will go to the council with a no recommendation. We'll see that discussion again in a few weeks. Last up, we're going to go back up to item K. Councilor Lewis, this is your R2 that we skipped over earlier relating to vaccine requirements. Councilor Lewis to present R2.
Mr. Chair, I'll move R222 or 22.2, amending the declaration of local emergency due to novel coronavirus COVID-19 to ban vaccine requirements for city employees, setting policy for future declarations. Mr. Chair, it's just pretty straightforward. It's, we want to just ensure that our city employees don't have to make a choice between keeping their jobs and, taking a vaccine that they don't want, that they don't need. And we want to give them some peace of mind with this bill that they wouldn't be faced with having to do that. Again, regardless of what the state or the federal government, might require us to do, that we may have to, follow, because then we may, even if we were to pass this bill and this were in place, we still may have to comply with other, again, state or federal laws. But at least as far as the city of Albuquerque is concerned, this would be the policy. I'm going to move this without recommendation to the council or to the next full council meeting.
That is the popular motion of the day for a no rec. Councilor Bassan, are you seconding a no rec?
No, not completely the top of the recommendation. So.
Right. Councilor Bassan, as you're back on that, councilors, discussion on the item and the motion for a no recommendation on R2.
And Mr. Chair, I definitely want to hear some responses on this from the council. I'd like to see what this committee is, interested in doing.
I have a few comments, but I'll let Councilor Bassan go first, and then Councilor Bassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilor Lewis, I support this. I personally hope everyone would choose to get vaccinated, but I also recognize that this is a choice and this is something that we should not mandate or require. So while people, I hope, will choose to get vaccinated, I also don't support regulating and mandating it.
Thank you, Councilor Bassan. If there's no other councilor, let me just take my comment here and just say, Councilor Lewis, I think you and I had a chance to talk about this. I just don't support it. I know the mayor's backed off of his administrative requirement for the time being, but I think there are some places where, particularly for some of our frontline city services, where the government does this work, in my opinion, particularly around public safety, around transit, around some of those opportunities that only the government can do, or we've chosen to let the government do, and people rely on our services. And I think when you take one of those jobs, you take on that responsibility to be there for the people and to be there for your coworkers. During the time that this was under emergency, that any of the COVID vaccines were under emergency authorization, I would have agreed and did, was not prepared to put forward any legislation on a mandate. But I think there are some basic things we have to do as a society and as an employer to set basic standards for our employees to be sure they're healthy. This is one of those things to me that says that there's as much of a risk of bringing, whether it's the current variant or the next one, to your workplace and disabling the city's ability to provide critical services, to me, is a non-starter. And I think that comes with that public service job. And I believe we should have the ability to require that when it's required. And look, Councilor Sanchez and I always go back to say, look, when I was a cop, which was now almost 20 years ago, so I'm that old, but I think, we took on all kinds of weird things. You had to get hepatitis vaccines. You had to, you had to go through all these extraordinary things to get qualified for these jobs, because they are special and you're taking on a public responsibility to others. And I think this is part of that. And so I will always support our ability to require city employees to meet the very basics of common sense public health standards, so we can provide our best services and then keep our employees safe. So I won't be supporting this. That said, if it's the will of this committee to do a no rec today, I fully expect this is a conversation the entire council wants to have, and so I won't delay that with comment today. I think this should go to the full council for a debate, but I won't be supporting it. Councilor Bitt.
Yeah, I think it's important enough. It needs to go to the full council. But as some folks know, I have a competing bill that has to do with our first responders, who are really on the front line and dealing with all sorts of people on the street, and people without any benefit of healthcare, we have a responsibility to the general public with regard to our employees. It's important we keep our employees healthy, and that's absolutely important as well. but those employees and especially the people as Chair Davis said, we're in the front line are, as long as they're still endangering the public, then I think we have to have our options open. I'm absolutely hope that we're past all of this in the near future, but we're not past it yet. And I think an absolute ban of this flexibility on that front is just not acceptable to me. So I can't support it either. But yeah, I have no issue with it going before the full council.
Any other comments, other councilors, before we go to Councilor Lewis to close? All right, folks, as a reminder, this is our last item tonight. We thank everybody for joining us. It was a long first FGO meeting to get our feet up from under us, and we had a 2-month backlog of legislation to get through. Please don't let your other half blame me for keeping you late from Valentine's dinner. Councilor Lewis to close on R2.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I urge your support for the motion.
Ms. Hinojos, you have the last word.
Councilor Bassan,
Yes.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Councilors, that is our last item on today's agenda, and us having no other business before this committee. This meeting is adjourned.